All right. Well, welcome to everyone. Today is Monday, January 25th, 2021. We'd like to all welcome you to our City Council meeting. So, Madam Clerk, do you have an announcement you'd like to read before we get started?
Yes, just one moment. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, and state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of City Council are present at this meeting through electronic means, and members of the public are welcome to view the meeting at www.fallschurchva.gov/council meetings. Public comments were accepted, and those who signed up to speak would have spoken via the meeting platform. I didn't have anybody sign up this evening. So to speak on a public hearing item or provide general public comment, a completed speaker form must be submitted to www.fallschurchva.gov/public comment before noon on the day of the council meeting. Written public comments, including those regarding public hearing items sent in advance of the meeting, will be accepted at cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. This meeting is now called to order. Did you want to call roll, Madam Clerk?
Yes. Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes, here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Mr. Litkenhouse?
Here.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Charter.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
All right, thank you. And do we have the flags and the Pledge of Allegiance teed up on it for our screen? Ms. Messner? There we go. All right, so now it's time for the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like you all, wherever you might be, to rise and stand with me and recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So now we are on to receipt of public comments. Madam Clerk, would you like to read the public comment or the written comments?
Yes, a number of them are regarding the public hearing we're having on the Broad and Washington project this evening. Would you like me to do them now or hold them until the item?
I guess unless someone specified they'd like it to be read at the time of the item, why don't you just go ahead and read them now?
Okay. So Meredith Anderson asked Council to prioritize affordable housing and allocate the additional voluntary concessions from schools, library, and parks to the ADU program for the Broad and Washington development. Allison Brown and Gardner Humphreys of 706 Poplar Drive urged Council to support the proposal to buy additional affordable dwelling units using voluntary concession money in the Broad and Washington project. Paul Boson, 605 Fulton Avenue, and Christine.
The impeachment power was important to America.
Does somebody have their microphone unmuted? I'm getting some.
You can't, please mute unless you're speaking.
Thanks, sorry. I thought I was getting an echo. Paul Boson of 605 Fulton Avenue and Christine Lee Holtz of 215 West Cameron Street ask that Council increase the percentage of affordable housing units from 6% to 10% in the project and make the set aside permanent. Julie and Scott Budine of 212 Lawton Street ask that the voluntary contributions for the Broad and Washington project not be used for additional affordable dwelling units and that the funds be applied as planned. Andrea Comont supports dedicating the financial resources provided to the city by the developer to increase the number of affordable units at the project. Mary Chavez of 215 Lawton Street wrote that the city should develop a more efficient ADU policy to tackle the problem of providing housing and opposed renegotiating the voluntary contributions, especially those that provide for traffic calming on Lawton Street. Julie Conroy asked the City Council to consider cooperative housing when working on affordable housing issues. Pete Davis of 608 Highland Avenue shared a letter he wrote to the school board asking them to take an active role in supporting affordable housing. MT Gutmanis supports increasing affordable housing to 10% at the Broad and Washington project. Brenda Heffernan urges City Council to approve an additional 13 ADUs at the project. Kevin and Joan Hurst wrote in support of allocating development concessions to increase affordable housing from 6 to 10% of the units at the project, and noted that they realized this would reduce funds for other priorities. Julio Cesar Idrobo wrote in support of increasing the percentage of affordable housing contributions for Broad and Washington because it was the right thing to do to help those in need and also to fulfill the goals to create, preserve, and increase affordability in the community. Hannah Jordan supports increasing the number of affordable dwelling units in the city, particularly in new developments like the one at Washington and Broad. Christina Martinez expressed strong support for prioritizing the additional VCs that will allow the city to achieve close to 10% of affordable housing in the Broad and Washington project. Eric Pelton of 303 North Oak Street strongly supports increasing the affordable housing options in the city as soon as possible, even if it means trading other concessions from developers in order to gain more equitable housing choices in new projects. Deborah Z. Roth enthusiastically supports the new options for affordable housing being proposed for the Broad and Washington project. Joshua Shakur, chair of the Falls Church Housing Commission, wrote to thank the school board and the city council for changing the school names and asks that the symbolic action be turned into policy actions by increasing the ADU percentage at the Broad and Washington project. Kathleen Tice of 500 Meridian Street asked that affordable housing be prioritized in the next budget cycle. She supports redirecting voluntary concessions at the Broad and Washington project from the library, parks, and schools to increase the number of affordable dwelling units at that new project. The school board wrote to express concerns with the process for moving forward on a plan related to the voluntary concessions for the Broad and Washington project. They strongly support efforts related to equity and agree that an increase in affordable housing helps in that endeavor, but ask that no funds in the voluntary concessions earmarked for schools be committed until the school board could discuss the matter and a mutually agreeable plan was in place. Gina Kachechi of 200 North Maple Avenue wrote in support of the project as an important development in the center of the city and home to Creative Cauldron. Andrew Colangelo asked that the developer of the project not be allowed to swap the Whole Foods for a lower-end grocery concept. Laura Connors Hall, Creative Cauldron producing artistic director, wrote in support of approval of the project. Todd Friedlander asked that council not allow the developer of Broad and Washington to renege on requiring the inclusion of a Whole Foods as the anchor for the development. Marty Meserve of 798 Berry Street asked that council vote to allow the Broad and Washington project applicant to become a partner to Falls Church by approving the project. Sally Phillips of 200 North Maple Avenue requested that City Council approve the project. Sharon Van Duisen wrote in support of the project as a home to Creative Cauldron. Mark Werblood, 113 Rowell Court, asked for approval of the Broad and Washington project as it was recently modified as a home to Creative Cauldron and a win for the community. On other items, the CAC provided a study that they did on motor vehicle crashes in the city. Brian P. Creswick of 1104 Seton Lane asked that council consider the school system's performance since September of 2020 in budget discussions and to consider the many other needs in the city that are skipped in favor of the schools. Sean Dakin of 124 Whittier Circle asked that permanent gun ordinance signs replace temporary signs. Deborah Z. Roth provided comments on the proposed changes to the noise regulations in the city code and expressed concern about the impact on local businesses that offer live music. And the Steeples Homeowners Association wrote to say that they were largely in support of the Founders Row project when it was approved, but have concerns that the balance that was struck is in danger. They oppose allowing the developer to shrink the size of the commercial space and oppose an increase in the number of residential units. Thank you. That's it.
All right, thank you very much. It may be that someone still has their line not muted. Just if you can, please mute your Zoom line or Teams line if you're not speaking. Let's go on now to receipt of public comment. Madam Clerk, did anyone sign up to speak right now live?
They did not, but I did receive 2 additional comments. Let me pull this up. Steve Selby of 833 Villa Ridge Road is supporting the Broad and Washington project as a home for creative cauldron and artists in the community. And the Social Justice Committee and the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation passed a resolution in support of strengthening the city's policies on affordable housing. It reads, the Social Justice Committee and the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation strongly support a reallocation of the voluntary concessions from developers to reach the goal of having 10% of the total units to be affordable. Also, we further advocate that a portion of those units be made available to households earning less than 40% of the area median income. And this is in reference to Broad and Washington. And that's it.
All right, thank you. So let's move on to council requests. Are there any council requests before we move on to the report of the city manager? Okay, let's go on to the report of the city manager. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. Good evening. I want to hand the balance of my time tonight to Mr. Colin Brody, who is the emergency manager for the Fairfax County Department of Health, and he's been before the City Council and our community on numerous occasions to provide an update on the COVID epidemic, and he'll do that tonight, as well as provide an update on our progress in vaccinations and some of the challenges that we're trying to overcome with respect to the vaccination process. Before I turn it over to Mr. Brody, I do also want to just share an update in terms of the city staff response and how city staff have been dealing with COVID. Our essential personnel throughout this pandemic who are not able to work remotely have been coming into work and serving the community. And 2 of our largest work groups that are in that essential personnel include our police, our sheriff staff, and our Department of Public Works staff. In addition to those really large work units, we've also had some of our permits counters, our building permits, our treasurer, and our commissioner of revenue in particular have been here in the building throughout the pandemic to serve the public directly. With respect to outbreaks amongst our workforce, earlier on over the summer and this fall, we did have worrisome numbers of cases within our police department. And I'm very pleased to report right now that we have not had recent cases. And in fact, we have generally all of our personnel at work and not experiencing the need either for quarantine or experiencing symptoms of COVID within our public safety division. One area of particular concern, however, is in our Department of Public Works operations staff. And despite very strict protocols of mask wearing and maintaining social distancing for these essential personnel who've been reporting to work to take care of our streets, to pick up our leaves, to take care of our facilities, etc., we have in the last week experienced a series of positive tests within that workforce. So as a consequence of that, we have asked the entire Public Works operations staff, which numbers 28 employees, to quarantine away from work at home in order to protect their own health and also to prevent any further spread within that very important work group. For the public, I do want to just ask for patience. This obviously is a very visible service provider for the city, and particularly with wintry weather. These are the people that keep our streets clear with snow or frozen precipitation. We do have a plan in place to use contractors to keep our roads open, and we will focus on our hillier roads and our main corridors, and that's just by necessity of a reduced force and in order to respond to emergencies during this quarantine period. We anticipate that will last through February 4th. And so again, I would just want the council to be aware of that, and also the public to be aware of that, and ask for some patience as we get through this difficult period. We do have wintry weather planned for tonight, and so our plan of action for salting the streets, using contractors, we'll deploy that tonight, and we will also anticipate on later in this week where there's the potential for wintry precipitation to do the same. So that's my report, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Brody for his update, and then we would be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Brody, thank you again for joining us tonight, and we look forward to the information that you have to share tonight.
Thank you, Wyatt. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so good evening, everyone. I think I was last with you a couple of months ago, and I am back again to talk about vaccines. So, Cindy, if you would advance to the next slide, please. This caveat I mentioned last time, we've been including it since the very first day, and at this point, it's pretty common knowledge. But the vaccine situation and the COVID situation is changing day to day, hour to hour. So what I'm going to talk about tonight includes our best current knowledge, and obviously as things change, we will provide updates. All right. We can go to the next slide. Before we get into the details of vaccine in Fairfax, I think it's important to talk about vaccination in general. So we know that when we vaccinate against a particular disease, it provides two main benefits. It obviously protects individuals who receive vaccine when that person develops immunity or antibodies to whatever they were vaccinated against, the germ. In addition, though, it protects communities. So when enough people develop immunity and in this case, virus is less able to spread, it leads to fewer infections. And so this is what we call herd immunity. This is a concept that has made it into the public lexicon pretty recently, but it has been a bedrock principle within public health for many decades. So for COVID, community immunity is thought to occur when about 60 to 70% of people are immune. This number may go up, it may go down as more research is conducted and as more people are vaccinated and more studies are done. However, we work on an assumption that 60 to 70% of a population being immune leads to significantly less spread. And so there's a graphic on the slide that kind of points out what happens when you have no herd immunity. You have individuals who are susceptible, and a single infected person can pretty easily find suitable hosts among close contacts. Once you get to a point where you have immunity, either through prior infection or hopefully through vaccination, you decrease disease transmission because you run out of suitable hosts and the virus ends up being killed by or inactivated by the person who has it without it being able to spread successfully. So that's our end goal in public health. Next slide, please. And there are two concepts that are very similar, but also somewhat different. So we have vaccine. In the United States, we have 2 approved vaccines under emergency use authorization. Hopefully in the near future, we will have more. But vaccine is just one part of it. So you have to vaccinate people, and people have to want to be vaccinated. Without those two things occurring in tandem, you don't reach individual and community protection. So while right now we are experiencing what we've unofficially kind of discussed as the Black Friday of vaccine interest, at some point we will reach a threshold at which fewer people might want to get vaccinated. And so our role in public health is to provide education and equal and easy opportunities to be vaccinated so that we can turn vaccines on shelves or in freezers into vaccinated individuals in our community. Next slide, please. Before we dive in to our vaccine status, just a quick note on how these vaccines work. So right now there are 2 vaccines in the United States that are under emergency use authorization from FDA. They are both messenger RNA vaccines. So the quick and dirty explanation is on the slide here, but scientists were able to pick out a genetic sequence for the part of the virus that sits on the outside that contains the crown type appearance that makes it the name coronavirus. And so they use this to basically create an mRNA sequence, which is essentially like a cookbook for your cells, so that when it enters your cell, your body reads the mRNA and is able to build antibodies. And the way that they package it is through this lipid nanoparticle that enters the cell. It does not enter the nucleus, so it has no impact on your genetic sequence. And then what results is your cells following their normal process based on mRNA instructions to produce this viral protein. And then what happens is your antibody or your body sees essentially a copy of the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein without it actually being the spike protein, so it can't cause infection. But your body stimulates an immune system response as if it was the real thing. So what you are left with once the mRNA disappears and things return to normal is that you have antibodies in your blood that will be able to respond and attack the virus, the real virus, when it comes back. And this is why you typically see people say that their second shot is more impactful to them. So if they had side effects from the first one, they might report that the second one is a little more, they might be a little more sore, their arm might be a little more sore, they may have a fever. Those are all really good things. That shows that their immune system is working and that their immune system remembered the first shot and is fighting the second one off. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we have 2 mRNA vaccines, both under EUA, issued in late December. We also have 2 in trials, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. Those are using an adenovirus, which is a different type of technology, but the same concept. Without injecting the actual virus, you inject something that looks like it, and you trick your body into building an immune response. And then there's a nanoparticle technology from Novavax, which is still in its phase 3 trial, and we haven't seen study data on that yet. Next slide, please. So Pfizer and Moderna, this was the data that was presented to FDA. Both of them had over 30,000 participants in their phase over the course of their trials, and those trials are still ongoing. They go on for 3 years, so we're still in the early part of them. 95 and 94% efficacy. In Pfizer, 9 out of 10 severe cases occurred in the placebo group. The placebo group is the group of individuals who receive just a shot of normal saline. They don't receive a vaccine. And 30 of 30 severe cases occurred in the placebo group for Moderna. So both proved pretty effectively that COVID could take hold if you don't receive the vaccine. But if you do receive the vaccine, the chance that you develop illness is much lower. They were both efficacious across age, gender, and racial and ethnic groups. There were no serious safety concerns. The only part of this that didn't really bear truth is that the estimated doses by the end of 2020 were a little bit lower than the targets that were set for them. Next slide, please. This highlights where we are right now. And this is not uncommon. This is something that we saw during H1N1. We saw it abroad during Ebola, that in the early phases of vaccine production, there is constrained supply, there's centralized distribution, you have more demand than you have supply, and so you have to titrate and kind of prioritize within the population at large. The way that CDC recommended prioritization occur in the United States is we do healthcare workers first, and then we move into the next phase 1B, which is those who are more at risk of contracting the virus or developing severe illness. Over the spring and summer, we will move into a period of time where there are more vaccine doses that are coming to market, either through increased production or we hope more emergency use authorization, so we have more options than just Pfizer and Moderna. And then we could move into a broad administration network that is not just public health and hospitals, but it's pharmacies, doctors' offices, mobile clinics. And we in public health step back a little bit from massive vaccination events, and we focus on increasing access for critical populations who may be missed. Towards the end of 2021, we expect sufficient supply to meet demand. It seems like a long shot now, but we will reach a point where we are probably standing on a street corner hawking our wares. And so we will have an opportunity where individuals who wish to be vaccinated can do it quite easily with often no wait time, which is what we have for flu vaccine every year. Next slide, please. This is just a graphic representation of where we are right now. We are in phase 1A and 1B, which in Virginia also includes in 1B, we lumped in those with high-risk medical conditions and those who are 65 and older. Next slide, please. This is important to note because we often talk about priority groups, and I think in many minds, it is viewed as a linear and discrete set of guidelines. But what we know is that these priority groups in our society overlap. So together they account for over half of US adults. And that's what we've seen in Virginia, is that we are now opened up to nearly 50% of Virginia's population being eligible in some way for vaccine. There's significant heterogeneity, so people cross over. There are healthcare personnel who are obviously essential. They may also be over 65. They may also have high-risk medical conditions. And you can kind of see the Venn diagram. So when we talk about the numbers in each group, we recognize that there is going to be some duplicity. And so there is a need for some subgrouping. Next slide, please. Our approach in Fairfax to vaccine administration mirrors what is going on around the country, and it's a phased approach. So we started in late December with hospitals and public health being those who are vaccinating. That has largely continued today due to a slower vaccine rollout, which is not necessarily anything that the state or local health departments did. It's just it's a fact of life with vaccine production in the U.S. We expect to soon bring on board pharmacies and private providers, urgent care centers, places that are a little more convenient or closer to home. But our safety net providers are beginning the very early stages of being able to vaccinate. So they have the federally qualified health centers we have begun they've actually completed their staff, and they're moving through to some of their clients as well. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about what things look like here in Fairfax. So for those individuals in our community across our health district who have signed up but have not yet experienced our point of dispensing operation, this is the way it works. We have an appointment system. We did not believe, and we continue to believe this is true, that it is not a good idea to just have a come one, come all opportunity where you don't have the ability to social distance. You have individuals who may be standing outside in the cold for long periods of time waiting for a vaccine that may or may not actually be there. So we decided that it was far more advantageous to offer appointments where we knew we had vaccine. We could tell people when they got there that there is a vaccine for you, and then we wouldn't offer more appointments than we had vaccine for, so individuals would stay on our waiting list, and then we would open up appointments as we get vaccine. We have a text-based system that has worked out very, very well. Even with those who don't have phones, they can come inside at their appointment time and we can manually check them in. But for the large majority of people, they can wait in their car and then they come inside when they get the text message. They are greeted, they are checked in, and then they move into a vaccination station. And then after their vaccine is over, they move to an adverse event waiting area, which is just a fancy way of saying a 15-minute waiting period. And then they leave the pod and they check out with us. So what we'll do next, Cindy, you can go to the next slide. I thought it would be good to kind of show folks what one of our pods looks like. So we operate clinics not only at the government center, but also at 4 of our district offices. And then we're bringing on additional sites as we have vaccine. So this is what it looks like at the government center. We are able to process between 3,000 and 4,000 people per day through this operation. And it's essentially the entirety of the second floor of the government center is taken over by us. So individuals come in, they're checked in, they proceed into the conference areas. You can go to the next slide. In the conference areas, we have vaccine in each room in a refrigerator so that we maintain cold chain throughout the whole process. Any vaccine vials that are unopened return in cold chain back to our pharmacy, and they can be reused the next day or the day after. Next slide, please. This is what one of the rooms looks like. We have the ability in some rooms to do 13, 14, or 15 vaccination stations, and we have multiple rooms operating at the same time. And each of the stations is 6 feet apart so that we maintain social distancing throughout the whole process. Each station, you can go to the next slide, does contain a setup in which there is electronic medical records. This isn't one of the other rooms that we have. And so we're able to document what manufacturer is given, dosage, lot number, expiration date, and that goes into the patient's immunization record. Next slide, please. This is one of the stations. They're pretty compact. They have everything they need, and they are able to provide vaccine to the individual. You can see in the middle of the table there are the vaccine cards. We provide a written record for everyone who comes through of what dose they got and what day they are or what date they are due to come back. Next slide, please. And then behind the scenes, there's a huge logistical component. So we often get asked, could we come to a location and provide vaccine? It might be more convenient. And while that is certainly a goal we are working towards, these events are massive undertakings. And so they require almost as many staff behind the scenes as they require vaccinators. And so this is just one picture of what a loadout for one of these events looks like. It's multiple pallets, and it requires a staff to move around and make sure that each of the vaccinators is restocked and that the vaccine is accounted for and maintained in cold chain. Next slide, please. And then we have some additional pharmacy. We keep pharmacists on site for all these events. When we do the 3,000 and 4,000 event, 3,000 and 4,000 person events, we have a pharmacist in every room reconstituting because we use Pfizer vaccine, which requires reconstitution in the moment. And so we have pharmacists reconstituting 4 nurses who are able to continue vaccinating so that there's really no downtime at all. And that is so that's the end of the slideshow. Thank you for indulging me. This is a kind of graph of where we stand for cumulative doses administered to date. So we have a pretty, if this were an epi curve, I would not be as happy about it, but this is a pretty stepwise progression through time. And you can see where there are gaps in data due to uploads. But as of today, we have just over 60,000 people in our health district who have been vaccinated. And so that is a combination of Fairfax County, Inova, and Reston hospital systems. And we are building on that every day by the thousands. So we work through our lists, Inova and Reston work through their lists. And as we receive vaccine, we are able to provide it to the community. So I'm gonna pause there in case there are any questions. I know that one of the hot topics is the vaccine availability, and what I will say prior to any questions is just that we maintain a continuous dialogue with the Virginia Department of Health, who ultimately are responsible for the amount of vaccine we receive, and so they've recently switched to a per capita basis. So we essentially receive vaccine in proportion to our overall population, And they make those allocations based on the total received at the state level, and then that gets broken down so that each jurisdiction in the state receives an amount proportional to their makeup within the state. Unfortunately, what that means for us is that we were in a position where we previously ordered vaccine, and so we would put an order in, and it wouldn't be filled in its entirety, but it was filled at a higher number than what is being filled now, and that is just a function of the vaccine availability, not even at the state level, but at the federal level. So we are working in an environment where the faucet got dialed back a little bit, and so we are kind of retooling and modifying some of our appointment scheduling practices to make sure that we don't overextend ourselves and get in a position where we need to cancel appointments.
Okay, are you still there? Hello?
Yes, I do believe he is there and available for questions, Mayor.
All right, we'll go ahead and turn it over. I know a lot of people have great interest in what's going on, and particularly as relates to Falls Church. So I'm going to run through folks who have questions here. I may have a few of my own. So just starting out, it looks like Mr. Lichtenhouse was first, and then Mr. Snyder, and then Ms. Hardy. So Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Thanks, Mayor. Colin, thanks for that. And based on the latest email that we received from Jeff McKay, and then that hot button issue of the number of vaccines available, what does that mean for our teachers getting their second vaccine? I mean, we're trying to get our kids back to school as soon as possible. Does that impact our ability to vaccinate them with that second round?
No, it shouldn't impact second round. So we have maintained, not just Fairfax County Health Department, but Innova and Reston, if you are started on a regimen, we will finish that regimen. So what we are doing is dialing back the number of slots for first round appointments. But if you've received a first round and you are waiting on your second round date, there will be an appointment offered for you.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Colin and I volunteer at the same rescue squad, and I want to thank you very much for your service there, and especially your service to all of our residents. So let me get at a couple questions. So Virginia, compared to other states, doesn't rank very well for the number of vaccines available and actually put in people's arms. Can you explain that? And is that something that Fairfax County is a part of, or we're doing better than the statewide average?
Sure. I believe what you were talking about is the CDC map that shows doses distributed versus doses administered. A little bit of a technical explanation. So when we administer a vaccine, we record it in a system called VAMS, which is a CDC National Electronic Medical Record for COVID vaccine, the Vaccine Administration Management System. VAMS is a tool that is used to upload data to each state's immunization registry. And in Virginia, we have a system called VIS, so VIIS. Every state has one. That's how we record who's been vaccinated as kids, and we can send reminders about booster shots and things like that. So it's a pretty common public health practice to record vaccine in VIS. One of the issues we have, and we've discovered this, is that the data lag between VAMS and VIS is measured in days. So potentially it could be 4 or 5 days from when a vaccine is actually given in the arm to when it shows up on a dashboard of the doses administered. And CDC's data pulls from VIS. So there's a built-in half a week to a little over half a week lag in those numbers. In addition, in Virginia, some of the doses that are redistributed, so that means that they're received by public health agencies, but then they are given to a partner in the community who does additional vaccinations. If those don't get entered into VIS in a timely fashion, which is more a problem in rural areas, then they aren't counted as administered in the system, even though they actually did end up in an arm, often days before they're reported. So at the statewide level, VDH is working on improving that data feed so that we get a more accurate time interval, because VDH believes that there's about 225,000 doses that have not been that are not showing up on the dashboard. And when you account for that, we actually move well out of what people are kind of calling last place, because it's a data transfer issue. So when you look at total doses administered across the population, we're one of the top 10 states. So that should be rectified pretty soon. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, I think that does, because that's a metric that's frequently cited in correspondence and in concerns.
Right.
Secondly, what are the either public or private vaccination sites in the city of Falls Church?
So right now, we actually don't have any, well, I will call them public in the sense that they are offered to members of the public. We don't have any open door clinics where you can show up without an appointment. That goes across the health district. There are no vaccine clinics operating within the Falls Church city limits, but we do have clinics operating at 4 district office sites. So Herndon, Annandale, Springfield, and Mount Vernon. And then we also have the government center operation on the weekends. And actually now we've included government center during the weekdays as well. So we are working to expand it. Again, I mentioned the logistics involved in moving the vaccine make it a little bit challenging to guarantee no waste, which is one of our policies, that we're not going to waste any doses by having them kind of sit out on the table. So we hope to get more sites stood up in the future, by working with pharmacies on a pharmacy partnership, which would open up potentially 20 to 25 new sites across the health district.
Well, let me put in a strong request for 1 or more sites in the city of Falls Church, which I guess should come as no surprise to you.
Mm-hmm.
So finally, in terms of metrics, in order for us to move to being able to move to 1C, move rapidly through the different sort of subcategories to general vaccination in a way that you would like to go, how many doses do you need in a typical week? It's one thing to ask the state or the federal government for more, but what's the number or range of numbers that you would like to see in order for us to move rapidly in that chart, into that second area, and be able to get it also not only through the public health system, but through physicians and pharmacies like flu shots? What's the number of doses per week that you need in order to get there? Because that ought to inform what our requests are.
Sure. We were requesting, prior to a move towards a more population or per capita basis, we were requesting in the neighborhood collectively 20 to 25,000 doses per week. And then in addition, the hospitals were requesting a similar amount to be spread across both first and second doses. So our main issue right now is just the vaccine pipeline. And it is a problem that has been obviously discussed nationwide, that, Virginia is not alone in having more capacity to vaccinate than vaccines to administer. And so as we continue to push for as much vaccine as we can possibly get, but we could do substantially more vaccination every week than what we're doing. And when you add in the potential for not only pharmacies, but private healthcare providers who have practices in our community and would also be able to add to the numbers, we could be talking about tens of thousands of doses a week.
Let me try to ask the question again, because I want to push this along as effectively as we can to just so, and I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, and I apologize for that, but I need to know what to ask for. What's the metric? What's the number that we need to ask for to move us in a reasonable time, based upon, the availability of vaccinators and all the rest of it, to move rapidly through 1A or 1A, B, C, and then moving out to the general population? What's the number that we need in our health district so that we'll know that we're optimally where we want to be?
I think it is a little bit difficult to answer in that when we know we will receive more vaccine than we are currently receiving, we can bring online more vaccinators through private providers, pharmacies, other places. And so that number, it's a little bit unknown at this point because we don't know what the throughput is in all of the healthcare providers across Fairfax County because they have not, or Fairfax Health District, because they haven't had the opportunity to vaccinate. So I don't think I can give a particular number. We have not received enough to date to break our distribution system, and we were requesting 20 to 25,000 a week. So I think that there's significant capacity right now. For reference, we have over 120,000 people. Well, we have over 120,000 registrations in our system. Some of those are duplicates. They may have received the vaccine already and signed up multiple places, but we know that we have a significant backlog, and if we're only receiving, a fraction of that each week, it could take weeks or months to get through all of phase 1B.
So all I'm asking then to follow up is please give us something more to go on than just more. You can say that, but what I really want is some kind of metric that we can use in our advocacy efforts to say, this is failure and this is success. And I know there's a range and I know there are certain built-in assumptions, but you mentioned before that you were getting, before the reduction, you were getting 20 to 25,000 for the county health department and then 20 to 25,000 for the hospitals, if I heard you right. So that's about 50,000 per week. Is that right?
Well, it wasn't not each one of us got 20 to 25,000. So we received probably, looking back at our, before the switch over, we probably got 18,000 per week over here. And then Innova has the capacity to do almost 4,000 vaccinations per day. And so they were receiving enough commensurate with that throughput. And then Reston Hospital, in addition, is vaccinating their healthcare providers and others as part of phase 1A. So combined for the health district, we are not where we were before, and we are working with VDH to prove that we are under-resourced and have excess or unused capacity.
Okay, well, thanks again, but I do want as firm at least a range so that we can advocate most effectively and know whether we're getting not enough. So let me just finish with one more question. You gave us the numbers that you were getting before. What are you getting now under the new formula?
We receive about 13,000 for our total population. So that has to be divided among all of the vaccination providers within the Fairfax Health District. So that number goes partially to Innova, partially to us, partially to public safety. So the actual amount that we can administer every week is not that high. And that's, I think, part of the reason that a range or a number is difficult to say is because there is capacity out there that has not been tapped yet. And once it is tapped, we will see a progressive rise in the number that we can, as a health district, collectively do every week.
All right, so just, and I appreciate everybody's patience. So the one number we do know is that we were getting, I don't know, total of like 30, 40,000 before, and we're now getting 13,000. That seems to me the range that we're talking about. And the 13,000 not only goes to the health district, but goes to Innova and Reston. Am I right, Colin?
That's correct.
Okay, that is a huge, huge failure, not on our part, but in terms of what's being produced in the allocation at the state level, even to achieve where we were before, let alone where we really want to be. Thanks very much, Colin. I appreciate your work.
All right, Ms. Hardy, and just keep in mind, we do have a busy agenda, 2 land use cases for tonight, so just keep that in mind. Ms. Hardy?
Great, thank you. Thank you, Colin, for joining us. So I think Mr. Snyder is really trying to get at the clear kind of issue at supply and kind of the what. Could you, I guess to your best ability, give us any line of sight to when supplies will get better? You mentioned spring, summer, that's obviously a big range, but when do we think things will get better?
So we know that there should be another emergency use authorization in February, or an application for emergency use authorization from Johnson & Johnson. That is one of the adenovirus vaccines. So it is a little different in its makeup. It is a single dose regimen, not a 2-dose regimen. That has already been, that is in production now across the globe. So if we were to add a third vaccine option, even if we didn't have increased throughput from Pfizer and Moderna, which is obviously a national priority as well, we would have a third option to provide across the health district. It is also more portable, so it can be administered in more places without the need for -80 ultra cold freezers, which is what Pfizer needs. And that's one of the reasons that we receive Pfizer, is that one of the few health districts that can accommodate and store ultra cold vaccine. So once we have a third manufacturer on the market, which should be sometime in February, we should see an improvement in the pipeline. Separately, there's work underway to enhance and speed up the production of Pfizer and Moderna.
But in terms of kind of a better time frame for citizens out there, you don't have a great sense of, other than February, we might get authorization.
Yeah, the authorization, based on the data that's come out, it is likely that we would see an authorization for Johnson & Johnson in February. When exactly in February is up to the manufacturer to submit, and then it takes about a couple weeks for FDA to meet and for CDC to issue their EUA. And then what we saw with Pfizer and Moderna, that it begins shipping pretty much the weekend on which the EUA is issued. They typically meet towards the end of the week. So it could be as early as March that we are vaccinating with 3 vaccine manufacturers instead of just 2.
Great. And right now you said that our backlog is about 120,000 people that have registered. And at 13,000 a week, that's going to take us 10 weeks to get through if we're assuming the current supply, right?
That's correct. Some of those, there were 120,000 pre-registrations. We have begun offering application, or we've begun offering appointment opportunities to those folks. But the total submitted at the moment, since we opened the registration, is around 120,000.
Got it. So over the weekend, as a result of the change in kind of the allocation, I think Virginia Hospital Center canceling appointments, and I guess Inova now also canceling appointments, I've received a flurry of messages from our citizens who had originally signed up at Virginia Hospital Center. They were told that their appointments got canceled and to go back through their health departments. They're concerned now that they're at the back of the line to that 120,000 queue. Could you provide us more transparency into how we're prioritizing it? Clearly, hopefully it's not just first in, first out. Are we prioritizing kind of that original 1B population, so the 75 and up, or 75 and up and then with high risk conditions? Kind of how are we getting through that list?
So it's largely how you described. We are sticking to the VDH prioritization guidelines. So we have healthcare providers who are in phase 1A, and then we moved into other essential workers and those who are 65 or older, or 16 to 64 with underlying health conditions. Those are part of the early part of phase 1B. So we are working through all of the applications in that kind of tiered structure. Within the structure itself, so if there are 2 equal registrations by qualification, then we offer it to the first one to submit, or the first one to call. However, when dealing with individuals who have been started on a regimen, so taking the Virginia Hospital Center folks, if they were in between dose 1 and dose 2, then we have a separate allocation for second round doses. And so we have begun a process of working with Arlington and other health districts to figure out what to do about them. But if the individuals are submitting today, for example, they would be prioritized and ranked accordingly in our scheduling system, and then offered appointments as we receive that vaccine.
Got it. So if they're, for example, both 66 years old, and they have, all the same risk and health factors, essentially it's first come, first serve, but someone who might be a higher risk would be prioritized ahead of that person.
Right. That's how the system is currently set up. Mm-hmm.
So originally the 1B age was 75 and up. So is 75 and up getting prioritized ahead of 65 and up?
Well, inevitably, so it is basically happening that way, because the earliest registrations, the ones that we have been sitting on for the longest period of time, are those who are 75 and up, because that was the original population that was eligible. As it expanded, later registrations were more inclusive of those who are across age ranges. So, for example, our most recent vaccination events have been largely 75 and older, because they were the ones who were, number one, met that criteria, and also were some of our oldest pending applications.
Yeah, I would say with the cancellation of those hospital appointments, I'm guessing you're going to have some new 75 and ups in there. So I would just want to make sure that they're fairly treated too.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Great. And then the last one, which I think I know the answer to, but I think is also just a request for city staff, is I continue to hear concerns that because it's the Fairfax Health Districts and doesn't say Falls Church, I know that you all are clearly serving us with equal priority and access because we are all part of the broader health district. But I think in communications, that's a thing that I continue to hear concerns about and confusion of, where do we go? Where does Falls Church City residents go? So I want to make sure that that is the case. My last one's more of a request on how can we help you? So besides obviously advocating for more supplies, is it resources? Is it distribution sites? Is it planning for kind of those mass vaccinations? Like, how can we support you now? Because I think where I want to make sure we go is, besides obviously, we will get to the other side when there is more supply, but what can we be doing in preparation for that?
I think that it is incredibly important that we manage expectations. So Virginia is obviously one of 50 states. We are one nation among many on Earth, and so these manufacturers have offered or promised vaccine not only to the United States but to other countries, and those are contracts that they entered into as vaccine manufacturers and pharmaceutical manufacturers that are global in nature. So while we obviously continue to advocate for more and more vaccine for the Fairfax Health District, I think it's important for everyone to communicate that this is going to be a long process, and that the public health practices that we have been using since the beginning, they work and they are effective. And in the absence of vaccine for everyone, we need to continue to try to flatten the curve and lower the curve. And so I think from our standpoint, vaccine is just one of many things that we're doing right now. We have hundreds of cases coming in every day. We're doing case and contact investigations. We're doing testing. We're doing vaccines. So I think not losing sight of the forest for this one tree is important, and allowing individuals to really understand the process, and that we will get to everyone who wants a vaccine. And we are working day in and day out around the clock to try to make that happen. And as soon as we have vaccine inbound, we release appointment slots. It's a very dynamic process. So we're really not sitting on vaccine. As soon as we get it, it's on our shelf, it's inventoried, and then it has an appointment, kind of on its label for later that week.
Thank you. And actually, I lied. One last question, because you jogged my memory. So clearly, got to keep up the social distancing, the masking, all the precautions we know works. We have these now scary COVID variants on our doorsteps. I think I just read today that Virginia detected the UK variant. Now there's an LA variant and a South African variant. Mm-hmm. With kind of the data that we know now that they might be more contagious than the one that we've been dealing with in the US, what sort of different protocols should we be preparing for? Is it increased social distancing? Is it different masking? Do you have any early indications on how the community should prepare?
Right now, we know that, yes, Northern Virginia did have its first identified case of the B117 variant, which is the UK variant. And while this is certainly concerning, it does not seem to appear that it leads to increased morbidity and mortality. It leads to more cases, but it has not been shown to be a more lethal strain or anything like that. And viruses mutate over time. This is something we've known happens. The original Wuhan strain is no longer circulating on Earth. It has died out, and so the fact that we have a strain that is circulating and transmitting perhaps more easily just speaks to the fact that we need to keep up what works for all the other strains, which is social distancing, masking, washing our hands, and that if individuals are feeling ill, that they seek testing. Testing is far more prevalent than it was in the very early days, and so we're trying to encourage folks who just think it's a cold or they just think it's a flu in the winter, that this is not the year to continue life as normal, and you should talk to your healthcare provider, get tested, and with all of those measures in place, plus the fact that the vaccines both have been shown to be effective against these new strains. Both Pfizer and Moderna have announced that we do have the ability to control it without changing or modifying most of the things that we're already doing.
So for now, things like double masking or more than 6 feet of distance because of the more contagious quality of them is not something that you're hearing guidance from the CDC that we need to do?
No, that guidance has not changed. There is, Dr. Fauci talked about double masking as kind of it provides an even greater layer of protection. I think I've shared the Swiss cheese model with you all before, that, you know, the more layers you add in, the greater the chance you interrupt droplets that may be coming through. But the official CDC guidance continues to be wear a mask, wash your hands, maintain your distance, shrink your bubble, make sure that you're maintaining appropriate precautions.
Great. Thank you very much.
Vice Mayor Connolly.
Thanks very much for all that information. And maybe I missed it. Does the new adenovirus vaccine need 2 doses, or is it a single dose?
The Johnson & Johnson one is just 1 dose.
Okay. So that would seem logistically like a really good option.
It is. It is a much easier vaccine to manage.
Okay. So I have 2 more things. One is, as I look at your chart there, I see you have a nice jump in Falls Church City on the 18th of January, and I want to thank you so much for, it may not have been you, someone else in the health department, but thank the health department for arranging the vaccine clinic for school employees. That is a huge step towards being able to reopen our schools and get our community a small semblance of normal. And I also want to say that I'm certain that if you want to come back to our schools, there will be space for you. I think that one worked really well, and I think the staff that were there were very pleased with how that went. So if the health department wants to come back to the schools, we will extend open arms for that.
Thank you.
Yes. And then my last is just about outreach and public health. I've heard some stories of places where we have frontline workers. You know, one of our nursing homes, they were so pleased that they were able to vaccinate a lot of their residents and a lot of their employees. However, we heard that only about 55% of the employees actually wanted the vaccine. So this is a situation where you have people in that top tier and for whatever reason have opted out of taking the vaccine. What kind of public health campaigns and education are you doing, and can we help with to encourage people to take the vaccine? I think I've heard a lot of it is related to minority communities feeling as if the long history in the United States of experimenting on minorities or not treating minorities with equity leads to people's understandable suspicion about this new technology and new vaccine. So I'm just wondering, what can we help in that regard to try to encourage people to take the vaccines when they're eligible?
Yes, it is. It is certainly a multifaceted challenge. So within long-term care facilities, within healthcare, we have not seen 100% uptake. We have yet to find a population that has 100% uptake of the vaccine. And so what we are trying to do is drill down and figure out what exactly about this particular vaccine and this particular virus leads to that hesitancy. And that is a project that we have a high-risk communities task force that works on this. We've been partnering with VDH and other health districts to perform focus groups and learn more about it. And the other part of it is that as more this is a new vaccine, and so it's scary for people. mRNA technology is new. There's been significant concern about there's a belief that it might change your DNA and lead to changes in your genetic makeup, and that explaining that in a way that makes sense to everyone is very difficult to do because it's a very technical explanation. And so what we in public health are trying to do is make sure that we can find leaders in communities who are willing to get the vaccine, and then they in turn can kind of share their experience as primary sources of what it is like to get the vaccine, and that it's actually not so bad. It is not causing people to have grave conditions. It is just, your body responding to a new invader, and it builds immunity. And so we're trying to use a kind of a multifaceted approach to get different communities on board with the vaccine. And we are seeing that over time, we get calls and we get applications and inquiries from people who were initially hesitant, but then 2 of their friends got it and said it wasn't so bad, so now they're signing up. So this is not uncommon in vaccine rollouts. It's a pretty common public health scenario that there are early adopters and then it kind of migrates over time. And we're hoping that is the case again here.
The principal of our middle school, Valerie Hardy, who is African American, wrote a really lovely and compelling blog post on the 18th, encouraging her colleagues, her friends, her family, and explaining why she decided to get it, and included research and information that the developer of the Moderna vaccine was an African American woman. And she really did change some minds. So she would be a good person to include as a leader in our community.
And I should mention that we do have a Multicultural Advisory Council. So the MAC has been an institution within the health department for years, and so we've used the MAC, and the MAC continues to do work in the community to help amplify the message in communities that may not be reached by traditional public health messaging.
Right.
All right.
So if we can help you in any way, we're here. Thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have one operational question. How sophisticated is our scheduling software in terms of being able to group household members together who are in the same category? Let me give you an example, which is anonymized, but I assure you not hypothetical. Let's say that a 90-year-old was assigned to receive a shot at the government center on Thursday, and we'll get out there to make that happen. But the other nonagenarian in the household has not received notification of an appointment, even though they applied at the same time. Is that typical? Is there anything that can be done about that? Is there a human person who can intervene and try to correct that, what seems like an oversight?
So the system, speaking transparently, the system is not that smart to figure out and match up addresses. This is a system that has been in development for a few months now and continues to improve week by week. There's a lot of data export functions that we needed to get right in the first round of improvements to make sure that the data was feeding into Viz appropriately. Right now, we are releasing appointments, as I mentioned before, in a mix of priority group and then also the order of the application. And in some rare occurrences, because we've heard of this happening a couple of times over the last few weeks, 2 applications from the same household happen to occur at the spillover point. So we may release 2,000 names and send 2,000 emails. Line 2001 in the database might be that person's spouse or caregiver or another member of the household. And so often the invite comes a couple of days later when we release another batch. And in some cases, they're able to make appointments on the same day. We do, if individuals have an appointment on the same day but different times, obviously human logic in the moment at the clinic takes precedent, and we will see both of them as a pair. Or in some cases, we've had multi-generational households where 2 sets of in-laws come, and we're able to see them as long as they have appointments that day. There's vaccine for them, and so we can work them in even though they may have discrete appointment times. However, I am noting the request. I will take it down as a request for perhaps some way to identify households that may be registering.
Okay, thanks.
All right, any other questions? Mr. Brody, we thank you for the fine work you're doing on behalf of our community in this update, which is very helpful, and hope that you'll come back and see us soon.
I hope so too. I hope my numbers will be bigger next time.
We do too. Godspeed. Let's get
Yes.
on with this and crank
Yes.
it up. We sure need it. Thank you very much.
All right. Good night.
Night. So, Mr. Shields, did you have anything else you wanted to say as part of the city manager's report?
No, thank you, Mayor Tarter.
All right, let's move on to business on the agenda. Madam Clerk?
Yes, we have 3 public hearings tonight. The first 2 are for Broad and Washington. Did you want me to read those together?
Please.
Okay, we have TR 20-33, resolution to amend the comprehensive plan of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, to change the designation of approximately half an acre of land known as the city lot located on Park Place, real property code number 53-104-015, from business to mixed use on the city's future land use plan map on application by Broad and Washington LLC. Then we have TR 20-34, Resolution 1, to grant a special exception for residential uses within a mixed-use development project, and 2, to increase the building height with a bonus of 16 feet to a maximum height of 91 feet for a mixed-use development project on approximately 3.16 acres of land located at 100 North Washington Street and 127 and 131 East Broad Street, and Park Place, real property code numbers 53-104-051, 53-104-036, 53-104-050, and 53-104-015 on application by Broad and Washington LLC. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Shields, the staff report, is that Ms. Rusi?
It is. Thank you, Mayor Tarter. What I would propose tonight is that for this case that we start with a staff report and then hear from the developer, have council questions of both staff and the developer, and then hold the public hearing. And then this matter is before the city council for final consideration per the schedule that was adopted back in October when this case was first referred out to boards and commissions. The staff recommendation is adoption of TR 20-33 and TR 20-34. The proposed project is, as noted in the staff report, is generally consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and other applicable policy and city codes. In addition, in the voluntary concessions, there is a proposed structure for handling ADUs and to increase the number of ADU units. And it is the staff recommendation that this matter be taken up by the City Council for a formal action at a later date in February, just to allow staff a bit more time for discussions on the best approach within the structure that is offered in the voluntary concessions by the developer. I believe that we have put together a draft of that resolution just for City Council's discussion, but there's not expected to be action on that resolution relating to the allocation of ADUs per the structure that's offered in these VCs tonight. Let me turn it over to Ms. Rusi for a staff report. We do have updates that have occurred since the last time the council has discussed this, and the developer, I think, also will focus their comments on those updates. Ms. Rusi.
Good evening, Akita Rusi with Planning. The applications before you this evening in support of the proposed Broad and Washington project include a land use map amendment to change the designation of the city lot from business to mixed use and special exceptions for residential use in a mixed use project, and a height bonus for a building height of up to 91 feet. I'll just quickly provide a quick summary of the staff report that's before you tonight. For a general summary of the proposed project, development site includes total of 4 properties at 100 North Washington, 127 East Broad, 131 East Broad, and a city parking lot on Park Place. The proposed project entails a mixed-use building, including 339 residential apartments, above ground floor retail, community theater space for Creative Cauldron, a Whole Foods market at the corner of Broad and Washington, in addition to general retail uses along Broad Street, and under and above ground structured parking garage, which includes the 64 replacement public parking spaces. The current zoning designation is B2 Central Business for all of the properties involved. The land use map designation is business for the city lot, and mixed use for the 3 properties owned by Insight. In terms of council meetings and guidance to date, the City Council held several work sessions and requested further development of several key elements of the project, including interim parking, architecture, affordable housing, uses, and neighborhood support of adjacent businesses as well as nearby residents. In response, the applicant has made the following key improvements to date. Successfully worked with VDOT for their approval and concurrence on the proposed medium break and signal modification at Park Place. On January 19th, VDOT signed off on that proposal. Interim offsite parking agreement for 65 public parking spaces on adjacent properties. Worked with Clarendon's and Thompson's Italian for their support. Commitment to parking and wayfinding signage around the site per the approved EDA standards. Worked with city staff to provide flexibility in the VCs to maximize affordable housing. Added work from home units to the mix. Reduction in height on city lot portion of the project and at the corner of Broad and Lawton Streets by a floor level. General architectural updates to include more details and additional articulations on several elevations of the project. And finally, increase the number of conduits for future EV stations and other updates to the VCs in response to city comments. On the 4 key issues that were identified based on council's previous guidance, the applicant has made the following improvements. On Whole Foods, in the updated VCs, applicant has modified the definition of a full service groceries to require that it be a top tier national or regional chain with organic goods comprising a significant portion of goods for sale. The sentence they added last week about the VCs controlling permitted uses regardless any labeling, descriptions, or images on the other application materials was removed this afternoon. On the ADUs, as I've just mentioned, the VCs were updated to include several ADU scenarios and the option to provide up to 10% of the total dwelling units, but offset with financially equivalent erections and the other VC contributions. This is discussed in more detail under the SC analysis. On State Theater, the applicant has been in discussions with them and intends to provide an update to council this evening, so I'll defer that to them. On Lawton Street, the applicant has made several changes to building height, architecture, and massing along Lawton Street in the latest submission, and reduced the building height by a floor level on the city lot portion of the project. Additionally, the applicant has agreed in the latest VCs to reduce the amount of cementitious paneling along Lawton Street. They do have an illustration tonight showing the material updates on that facade. In terms of voluntary concession changes, since the council saw the VCs on January 4th, the applicant has made several updates to reflect all of the commitments and changes I've just described, and the latest draft was received this afternoon with those changes. In terms of staff review, the latest revised submission received December 17 was reviewed by city staff. All staff comments received to date are provided in attachment 22nd of the report. Should council approve the project tonight, staff will work with the applicant and the Planning Commission on further development of the project details at site plan and to address some of those comments. Special exception applications are evaluated based on primary and secondary criteria. These general SE objectives include comp plan consistency, fiscal impact, quality of uses, and various community benefits, including transportation, affordable housing, open space, and environmental sustainability. Based on staff's analysis, the proposed project demonstrates many of the objectives under the SE criteria and provides community benefits in several areas, including 1, substantial positive net new revenue with a projected range of $1.1 to $1.5 million annually. 2, environmental benefits such as green buildings, stormwater management, and cash contribution towards future tree planting in the city. 3, affordable housing. 4th, long-term home for a community asset like Creative Cauldron. And 5, transportation improvements, including improved streetscape, public open space, bike share funding, bus shelters, new crosswalks, and improved access to Park Place businesses. For comp plan consistency, Both the comp plan and the downtown small area plan talk about the redevelopment potential of this site. The city's general vision for this area calls for a mix of uses surrounding a network of pedestrian pathways and public plaza in the city's downtown area. The proposed project demonstrates consistencies with many of these aspirations for walkability and vibrancy. Those are some highlights of the staff report. With that, staff recommends approval of the project this evening, and that also reflects the recommendation of the Planning Commission. The commission met on December 2nd and voted unanimously to recommend approval of the proposed project. That I'll turn it over to the applicant for their presentation, and I'm happy to take questions anytime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, let's turn it over to the applicant.
Great. Well, thank you for having us this evening. I'm Scott Adams with McGuire Woods. Also joined tonight by Maury Stern from Insight Property Group and many of the other members of our project team. But we're very excited to be here this evening for the culmination of really 5 years of work with lots of twists and turns in between. But over those past 5 years, we've worked very hard, and in particular over the past 15 months in the current application to address issues that have been brought up with the project as it's gone through the review process, and really try to work in a collaborative and constructive manner with the city to address all of those issues. And we think we've done a pretty good job of that with the project that's before you this evening. I think our goal has always been to create a project that we in the city can be proud of and that provides a significant amount of benefits for the residents of the City of Falls Church. And again, we think the project that's before you tonight really accomplishes those goals. It brings a highly desired use in Whole Foods to the City of Falls Church. It creates a permanent home for Creative Cauldron, and it really creates a sense of place at a significant intersection in the city by furthering the city's comprehensive plan and small area plan goals, providing significant open space at key locations, including the plaza at the corner, which we've worked with the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation and Creative Cauldron to create a Unity and Justice Plaza to recognize Falls Church's history and the ongoing fight for racial equity. In addition, we've created a project with activated streets and wide unimpeded sidewalks to really create and foster pedestrian activity, and also created a project with significant outdoor seating throughout for the public. This is a project that also exceeds the city's policy goals. As you heard from staff tonight, we've modified the voluntary concessions so that there are multiple ways that this project will achieve 10% of the units as affordable housing, and providing flexibility for the city to move forward with the policy that they see will fit best for the needs of the city and its residents. Additionally, we've provided significant environmental benefits well beyond city minimums, transportation commitments that encourage multimodal transportation and providing new infrastructure, and also including innovative uses like the work from home units that will put the City of Falls Church and this project at the forefront of trends in that type of use. In addition, we've designed a project that is respectful of our neighbors. We have the support of Clarendon's and Thompson's Italian, and we've worked diligently and in good faith to reach a reasonable agreement with the State Theater and continued to have those discussions right up until this meeting tonight. Additionally, we've worked very hard to address concerns from our neighbors on Lawton Street and worked to maintain all of the 2018 commitments that we had made previously, but also reducing the height of the building on the corner of Lawton and Broad by a full floor. And then increasing the amount of masonry and reducing the amount of cementitious material on that facade. From a fiscal standpoint, we think this project is a home run for the city, and not just the revenue generated to the city, but also when you look at the benefits and commitments that are being provided, really are in significant excess of what's been provided in other projects. And we've faced a lot of challenges in the market and with COVID over the past 15 months. And I think we're happy as a project team that we have not walked back any of the commitments that we've made, and have continually worked to add additional commitments and address issues that have been brought up during the process. And we think that's made it a much better project over time and the way that it has evolved. And so we wanted to take the time tonight to just talk through some of those project benefits in a little more detail, and some of the significant changes that we've been working on with the city up through even this evening. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maury Stern to start running through that. And if we could go to the next slide, please.
So as you all know, we've been working very diligently with Creative Cauldron ever since we envisioned the project. Actually, I think it was 6 years ago. Scott didn't give us credit for actually the length of time that we've been working on this, but I think we acquired the property 6 years ago, and very shortly thereafter envisioned Creative Cauldron being a part of the project as it was in the approved 2018 entitlements, and we've carried all of those commitments forward into this plan. So we're providing a permanent home for Creative Cauldron in the city of Falls Church. We've fixed their rent so that it's a known commodity. They know what they're going to be paying, includes TIs, and they're able to plan better than they are in their current space. We've agreed to build out the space for them, so there's no capital commitment from them that's needed for this space. And all in all of these commitments together are multi-millions of dollars that we have steadfastly stood to and committed to from the previous plan into this plan, and are very excited to provide that home for Creative Cauldron in Falls Church. If you go to the next slide, we've spent a good bit of time over the last several weeks talking about our commitment to Whole Foods, and I want to be very clear that the commitment tonight is as strong as it was when we first brought this proposal forward in November of 2019. At that time, as we do now, we have a signed lease. Nothing has changed. That lease is still in full effect. We and Whole Foods are as committed as we ever have been to this site and bringing a store to this site. Once we get approval, hopefully tonight, we will move forward in the process to site plan and move quickly into design and construction and bring that Whole Foods to fruition. The conversations over the last week or two have all focused on the very unlikely scenario that Whole Foods doesn't open here. And the modifications to the VCs have tightened up that language, as Ms. Ruzzi referenced, to ensure that if Whole Foods were not to open here, the only thing that could open without coming back to the City Planning Commission and City Council and going through a process is a regional or national grocer with an organic component that is 56,500 square feet as the Whole Foods is envisioned. So that in our view protects the city, protects the constituents, that in that unlikely scenario that the only thing that can go to in this space is a regional or national grocer. And as you all know, this project brings significant fiscal impact to the city. That the property today, I've stressed before, I'll stress again tonight, it is really floundering. Most of the office has been vacated in both of the buildings. The Applebee's is vacant. It generates less than $116,000 we originally put forward per year in fiscal impact. And as you know, the new plan in our studies will generate about $2.3 million in net fiscal impact to the city versus our previously approved plan, which was only about 1.6 million. So it's a significant improvement over our 2018, but a dramatic improvement over what is there today and what is declining there today. With that, I'll turn it back to Scott to talk about some of the design elements of the project.
Sure. And, one of the things that, as I mentioned at the top, we've really tried to create is that strong sense of place for this project and for the city. This is a site that is at a very important intersection in the city. We think sort of the heart of the city of Falls Church, and creating that strong sense of place that frankly doesn't exist right now is something that we think is really important and something that is achieved by this project. And from our perspective, it really starts with the commitment to a significant amount of public and private open space, and really locating those public spaces in particular at key locations, so that we're getting, and the public is getting, the greatest benefit from the design of the building and the location and design of those open spaces. And so, in addition to, I guess, just the use of those spaces, we've also tried to design the project so that those public spaces provide a lot of connections through the city and through the project. In particular, the Pocket Park that connects Lawton to Park Place, and then also as part of the most recent set of plans, adding a connection from North Washington Street that connects for pedestrians from North Washington to the Thompson Italian parking lot. So really trying to, again, integrate our project into the surrounding fabric and create those pedestrian and public opportunities within the project itself. And if we go to the next slide. And I guess sort of the front door, and what we really think of as what will be the great meeting space for the community is the plaza right at the corner of Broad and Washington. And so we've pulled the building back and created a public space really right in the heart of Falls Church, but really in the most prominent location and portion of the site, to really make sure that acts as a front door and a gateway, not only for our project, but for the city of Falls Church. And designing that space so that it's fully usable by the community and community groups as a gathering space for outdoor performances, but also for passive uses and people who are looking for a spot to sit or have the kids run around in the grass open area. But really designing that so that it is a heavily used space and really open to the public. And if we go to the next slide. And a big part of the design for that plaza also is the collaboration that we have with Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation and Creative Cauldron to create the Unity and Justice Plaza and really program the plaza to address those issues and really enhance the sense of place and the sense of community, but also tying this project and that public park into the city's past and also its present fight for racial equity and social justice, and really consider that a place to be able to remember the best of Falls Church and what Falls Church has been and can be, and recognizing figures and groups in Falls Church's past and present who were pioneers in the fight for justice and equality and civil rights. And so we're very happy to be working with our partners at Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation, Creative Cauldron, and coordinating with other City of Falls Church stakeholders to incorporate a really important idea into the public spaces in this project. If we go to the next slide, please. Along the back of the project, and we talked a little bit about just the connectivity that the public space on the Lawton Street side provides. But really just trying to create, not only that connection, but also a more passive neighborhood scaled public park, and really have it be a very well-designed park with appropriate lighting and seating options that balances, the public park aspect, but is also respectful of our neighbors on Lawton Street. But we're really excited. We think it's going to create a fantastic gathering place for the neighborhood, but also creating those pedestrian opportunities for direct connection from that part of the city to Park Place. If we go to the next slide. And the public spaces, again, we really think are the anchor for creating the strong pedestrian zones and that street level activity that creates that sense of place and is really going to be an asset to the City of Falls Church. And so creating lots of seating opportunities, both at the plaza, but also throughout East Broad Street with outdoor dining options, creating multiple entrances on East Broad and North Washington and Park Place to facilitate pedestrian activity, but also limiting the amount of curb cuts in the project so that we have one curb cut on East Broad Street, one curb cut on Park Place, and really prioritizing the pedestrian environment, which again leads to that better sense of place in that activity level. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to turn it back over to Maury.
And so, as you all know, we spent an incredible amount of time on this project working on parking, both during our construction and when the building's finished, especially given that we're proposing to acquire the city lot and want to or have figured out a way to maintain access to that public parking both during construction and improve the situation when our project is done. So we've also, in that process, made significant changes both to the design of our project and then, more importantly, the construction sequencing. So as you may remember, when we first came before you, we thought there could be up to 2 years when the public parking on the city lot was unavailable to the neighbors and businesses in the immediate area. And through resequencing our construction, which is a costly concession on our part, and thinking through ways to accommodate parking off-site, we've reduced the amount of time that there isn't any parking on site to between 3 and 6 months, and we think closer to the 3-month range. But during that time that there is no parking on site, we've secured 65 spaces across Park Place that are available to the public on nights and weekends. And that has addressed, we believe, all the concerns of both Clarendons and Thompsons and many of the residential neighbors. And as you know, we have the support now of Clarendons and Thompsons, as we have since first reading. Over the last several weeks, we've spent a lot more time talking to the State Theater, but that's not to say that we haven't been engaged with them throughout the process. And we feel like we have worked diligently and in good faith to get their support. The new bit of information that came out a few weeks ago that we've been working tirelessly over the last several weeks to address is the daytime parking during those 3 to 6 months when there is no parking on our site, and we don't have off-site parking secured. So that's something that we did not realize until maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago was a concern to the State Theater. And we feel like we have gone above and beyond to address that and put forth an offer to them that addresses that issue. The concept for that offer is we looked at their last 2 years of private events, and based on what they're projecting as their loss during those 3 to 6 months of 45% of their daytime private event business as a result of our construction, we offered to compensate them for that 45% loss for the entire 6 months, even though we think that time that there is no parking is closer to 3 months. And then as recently as this afternoon, we also offered to increase that by 4 months for up to 10 months if that delay in reopening the public parking on our site lasts longer than 6 months and up to the 10 months. So we feel like we have put forth an offer that's rooted in the data provided by the State Theater and something that is a reasonable offer, and actually in some ways we think goes above and beyond what anyone would offer in a similar zoning case. We're also happy to have that offer on the table and we will continue to work through with the State Theater until site plan and hope that we can come to an agreement, even though we're not quite there tonight. On the next slide, talking briefly about permanent parking. As I mentioned, when we reopen, not only are we replacing all of the 65 or 64 public parking spaces that exist today, we are also offering the 74 spaces that are available for retail and other uses are open to the public. If the 64 spaces are filled up in the public portion of the garage, we've agreed to 24/7 unimpeded access to the entire public portion of the garage, including those 74 spaces. We've also committed to the city's signage and wayfinding plans that have been recently adopted. And then we have always realized, but as we've gone through the process, realized that parking is a key issue here, and we feel like we have above and beyond to address the parking issues here, both during the construction and then when the project is ultimately built, and end up with a solution that appeases all of the various interests, both commercial, residential, and the users coming into our project. If you go to the next slide, as Scott and Ms. Ruzzi mentioned, there's been a significant amount of discussion over the last several weeks and months on affordable housing. But just to recap kind of what's on the table and what we've revised over the last several weeks, we put forth a baseline plan of 21 units that is 6% of the unit mix at the splits of the units for the market rate mix. In the last week or two, we've worked with housing staff to offer a second alternative, which is split between 40% studios and 60% 2 bedrooms, and would yield 18 units. And we put both of those alternatives in the VCs, as well as a cash in lieu option. And as Ms. Ruzzi and Mr. Shields mentioned, we've also included in the VCs an option to get to 16 units. The slide here says 13, but we modified the VCs this afternoon to indicate that this option would allow the city to get to 10% of the total units in the project, which would be an additional 16 units on top of the baseline option. And that option is at the city's discretion, which is also a change from the previously submitted voluntary concession. So the city can choose based on the formulas we've put into the VCs for the various AMI options and get to a 10% of the units being affordable. And we feel like we have, as I mentioned, worked diligently with the State Theater and the State Theater has agreed to 24/7 unimpeded access to the entire public portion of the garage, including those 74 spaces. So we feel like we have above and beyond to address the parking issues here, both during the construction and then when the project is ultimately built, and end up with a solution that appeases all of the various interests, both commercial, residential, and the users coming into our project. If you go to the next slide, as Scott and Ms. Ruzzi mentioned, there's been a significant amount of discussion over the last several weeks and months on affordable housing. But just to recap kind of what's on the table and what we've revised over the last several weeks, we put forth a baseline plan of 21 units that is 6% of the unit mix at the splits of the units for the market rate mix. In the last week or two, we've worked with housing staff to offer a second alternative, which is split between 40% studios and 60% 2 bedroo we think this is obviously a big win for the city for the project, and we're happy that we've been able to come to an agreement with the city staff, and look forward to your resolution forthcoming. With that, I'll go to the next slide, hand it back to Scott to talk about environmental commitments.
And the one thing I'll add on the affordable housing is also that just a reminder that we've made a commitment that all of those ADUs that are provided, whether in the baseline option or the additional ADUs, are all affordable for the life of the project. So they will not phase out over time, but will remain affordable as long as that building is in place. From an environmental standpoint, and I think everyone on the council has seen most of these commitments previously, but really trying to go above and beyond in the environmental commitments in this project, committing to achieve LEED Gold, providing for the future installation of solar panels and also green roofs in the project. Electric vehicle charging stations. One of the things that we heard was a desire to increase the amount of conduit for future stations. And so we've done that and doubled the amount of future conduit that we're putting in, so that under the current VCs, if that conduit is built out or those charging stations are installed, you've got 30 spaces for electric vehicle charging, which we think is a really significant commitment to electric vehicles and to everything that they bring. Additionally, we've maintained and enhanced our stormwater management commitment to go above and beyond, and frankly, well above and beyond the city stormwater management requirements to help with downstream flooding. And then also have maintained our commitment for a $20,000 contribution to the city's stormwater management fund for tree plantings in the Trips Run and 4 Mile Run watersheds to, again, help with some of that downstream flooding by planting in the watershed, but also increasing tree canopy in the city of Falls Church. If we go to the next slide. Most of the transportation commitments in this project are really focused on multimodal transportation. And so promoting pedestrian activity, bikes, and other modes of transportation other than people just driving to the site with a car. And so we talked a little bit about the limiting of the curb cuts to really prioritize pedestrians as part of the project. But also we've included strong bike commitments, both visitors, bike parking as part of the street furniture and the streetscape, but also secure storage for biking for residents of the project, and then full funding of the bike share station for the life of the project, which I think conservatively saying, 30 years for that, that's a $600,000 commitment to bike share in the city of Falls Church. Additionally, we've added laybys on East Broad Street to help facilitate ride share and delivery. And then we've also made significant commitments to infrastructure in the city of Falls Church, and primarily the new leg of the signal at North Washington and Park Place. And as Ms. Ruzzi mentioned, we did get VDOT's concurrence for that modification. So the installation of that new signal leg, the removal of the existing median, so that'll be a full access signalized intersection at Park Place. So something that we're very excited about, and excited that VDOT is in support of that change. If we go to the next slide. We've also worked very hard with our neighbors on Lawton Street to address their concerns, and really have just significant and regular discussions with them about the concerns that they have on the project, and then working to resolve those concerns as best that we can. And so that really started with retaining all of the 2018 commitments that were made as part of the project. So no balconies facing Lawton Street, pulling back the courtyards, and as part of this iteration of the project, we've actually pulled those courtyards back further from the edge of the building, so that you don't have anyone in the courtyards sort of being able to overlook into the neighbors in their yards. We've retained the street trees that are existing on Lawton Street, which helps provide a lot of screening for the building, but also have provided enhanced screening along that building frontage. We've also maintained our $50,000 commitment for traffic calming and permit parking, along with the new crosswalk on Lawton Street. In addition to that, as part of the evolution of this iteration of the project, We reduced an entire floor from the project right at the corner of Lawton and Broad, so that this version of the project that's before you tonight is a full story lower than what was approved in 2018. In addition, as part of I think our response to the comments that we received on the building portion on the city lot, we also reduced the height on that portion of the project by a full floor as well. And then finally, in the voluntary concessions, and I know this was a issue that was raised last week and has been raised in the past about just the materials on that facade. We updated our VCs with a commitment that we will be reducing the amount of cementitious material and really having a similar mix of materials, including an increase in masonry to what was approved in the 2018 version. And so prior to site plan, we'll be making those architectural changes to reduce the amount of cementitious material and add in additional masonry so that we're hitting those percentages from the 2018 approval. And if we could go to the next slide. And this just shows a comparison from 2018 right at the corner of Broad and Lawton, showing that full floor reduction in height. If we go to the next slide. And this is just, again, a comparison showing the relationship of our project to 107 Lawton. Just as a reminder, we doubled the setback from that 107 Lawton and then also reduced the height by an entire floor. And so you have a 45-foot, 46-foot building with a 35-foot building and 154 feet between the two. So we think really creating an appropriate transition from our project to our existing neighbors. And if we go to the next slide. And this just shows the existing significant vegetation that's on 107 Lawton right now. And then that'll be supplemented with additional plantings on our side of the existing wall that's already there. And with that vegetation and the reduced height, really have reduced the visibility of the project from 107 Lawton. So if we go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it back over to Maury.
So the last topic we wanted to cover are the work from home units, which we really think is an innovative concept and is responding to a trend of more people working from home, which has been accelerated by COVID. But we think we will be really unique in this offering, and it will give individuals, small businesses, a unique place to have their office and in their home that isn't just a corner of their apartment or their house, and really is purpose built for working from home. As you will remember, there's a separate entrance on Park Place that the finishes and the design will feel a little more commercial. The floors themselves will feel a little more commercial with amenities that are more like co-working than residential amenities, and those floors will be separated off from the rest of the residential building on those floors. And will really feel like a commercial workspace more than a residential hallway. And then the units themselves will have spaces dedicated for working. In the smaller units, a dedicated desk area, and then in the larger units, the bigger units will have a separate entrance and separate wing of the apartment that can be used as an office. And as a reminder, the commitment we've made in the voluntary concessions is for a minimum of 10,000 square feet of work from home units, which is one floor, but then up to another 2 additional floors, which would be another 20,000 square feet if the demand exists. And we think that's the right mix of work from home units at the time we move forward with the project and the building permit. If you go to the next slide, just to wrap up, I think you've seen tonight that over the 15 months of this process, we've made considerable changes, worked very diligently with all the various stakeholders, and put forth a proposal tonight that really will transform downtown Falls Church. We think this project will be a real asset to the city, to the residents, to the neighbors. It will obviously bring the first Whole Foods to downtown Falls Church, provide a home permanently for Creative Cauldron in the city of Falls Church, and really create a sense of place at the corner intersection of Main and Main in downtown Falls Church. And we think it not only meets, but enhances the city policy goals. And I hope you'll recognize that we've done everything that's been reasonably asked of us and more in a lot of cases, and that we've been open and forthcoming throughout the entire process. And what we put forth tonight is truly the best proposal we can offer, that we can immediately move forward with into site plan and into building permits and bring to life in as quick a time frame as we possibly can. So with that, we think it's ready for approval tonight, and hope that you will vote in favor of moving this forward. And we will be happy to take any and all questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. It's obvious you've done a whole lot of work over these past years and months and days, so we greatly appreciate it. But let's go ahead and open up to questions from council. Council questions for either the developer or staff? Okay, I guess there's no questions, and no, there we go. Ms. Hardy?
Hi there. Thank you. Thank you to staff and the development team for working really hard. I think it has come a long way. I'll start with kind of Whole Foods, because I know that's where we ended up at the last meeting. And I think since our last work session, I think between the newspaper article that I think intimated that you all were walking back the commitment, I wanted to kind of reconfirm that that is not the case. Do you have any other comments in response to some of the, I guess, at the beginning of the meeting, I think you all talked about it, but it'd be great for you to reemphasize where you guys stand with Whole Foods.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And we also, wrote to the news press to clarify what was published. But as I said earlier, our commitment, Whole Foods' commitment to the site is as strong as it ever was. We have not in any way attempted to walk back that commitment. We were purely responding to concerns of the city on what happens if Whole Foods does not open here, and how the language in the voluntary concessions handles that unlikely scenario. But we and Whole Foods are absolutely committed to moving forward at this site.
Okay. And the only language change in the voluntary concessions since the last draft is now the addition of the language that says it's going to be a top tier national regional chain with significant organic component.
That's correct.
Correct.
So no other reduction in commitment, I guess I would say.
Correct. It's the commitment has not changed. It's just been strengthened since last week for that unlikely scenario. If Whole Foods wasn't to be established, I think strengthening the commitment that anything that would go in there would be a top tier, high quality grocer, and it would have to meet, again, all of the requirements in the VCs and the designs and the plans. Otherwise it would have to come back to the city council, who obviously has the final say on any changes to the zoning.
Great, thank you. And then I'm going to turn my other question to staff. So Ms. Ruzzi, thank you. As I commented before, you have done a terrific job just keeping track of many comments from both council as well as boards and commissions. And so while this project is not perfect, clearly we've made a lot of progress on many fronts, but could you actually tell me where we don't think we've made as much progress as we would like? So what are kind of big open areas that we've pushed before, but we just haven't moved as far along as we hoped, between kind of council comments and what you've heard from boards and commissions?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, I'd have to agree with them that they've made a lot of progress on a lot of the key issues that we've sort of raised since the beginning of the project submission in November. And then there are minor items that the boards and commissions brought up and staff comments. I think some of those things we could sort of work through at site plan. Most of staff's comments are more detail oriented that can be worked through at site plan, I think. But otherwise, I think they've done a really good job of addressing most of the key issues that the council and staff raised in the past.
Great. Thank you. That's it for now.
All right, Ms. Hiscott.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for all the work over many years to get to where we are tonight in this project. I would just ask that the one kind of open topic that we've been discussing is this agreement with the State Theater. And I was just wondering if you could restate what the insight offer to the State Theater is, and then, how long that offer is good for, if you will.
Sure. So The offer that we have on the table is it's totally based on the information and the financial information that we got from the State Theater. So part of the discussions we've had with them, obviously they're in essentially the same position through most of the project because they still have access to 64 public parking spaces. The only time when that's not the case is for that 3 to 6 month period during the daytime hours. And so we really focused on that as an area where they're experiencing changed circumstances and the potential for lost revenue, and tying the offer to what loss they anticipate during that time period. And so as part of those discussions, we received their financial information showing revenues from 2018 and 2019 for daytime activities. And then we also, and I think the city council saw before the one of the work sessions, an anticipated reduction of 45% in revenue. And so, we're not arguing the revenues that they're generating. We're not arguing, anything related to, they're not going to experience a 45% decrease. We've taken their, what they've told us they're going to experience at face value. And in response to that, we took the financials they gave us, determined what the 45% of revenue for that 6 month period was. And that was the offer that we made to them, essentially make them whole for the time that they're experiencing a changed circumstance in not having access to those daytime parking spaces. We got a call from them late today with a counter offer that, frankly, just it was unreasonable from our perspective in scale, and we didn't think was tied to any of the revenue information that they had given us. But that said, we understand that they had a concern about what if our project goes beyond 6 months for that offsite time period when they don't have access to the daytime spaces. And so we did offer them an additional 4 months, so a total of 10 months where we would cover their projected 45% decline in revenue for the 6 months. And then if we went over 6 months, we would pay those additional 4 months for every month that we went over. We think that's a fair and reasonable offer that is totally tied to the actual revenue that they have for daytime events, and then also the anticipated decline in revenue that they've told us they expect to receive. So that's kind of where we're at on the offer, and we're not trying to have this be, I think, a hard end date that either accept this offer or you get nothing. What we've expressed is we're happy to keep that offer open through site plan, that if they want to come to the table and accept that offer, or frankly, if there are some changes to that offer that are reasonable, I think we're open to that, and having those discussions. And we're happy to leave that offer open and have those discussions moving forward.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Connolly, Vice Mayor Connolly, and then Mr. Duncan.
Thanks, Mayor Tarter. Just a few questions on the affordable housing VC, and that is on page 13. It says these units are viable for the life of the project. And I had someone ask me recently, what exactly does that mean? How long is the life of the project?
Sure. So the life of the project is as long as the zoning approval is in place and that building is there.
Okay. So no matter who owns the building?
Yep.
Or, okay.
Correct.
So there was a concern that life of the project was a term of art that meant much shorter than the actual, okay.
No, definitely not a term of art, maybe inartful drafting, but it's, the intent was, and I think the way that we interpret it and the city staff interprets it is, as long as the zoning is in place and that building is there, those units are affordable.
Okay, very good, thank you. And I guess we're going to discuss the resolution after this. So I'll leave my comments about changes to the voluntary concessions to the next conversation. Right, Mayor Tarter? That makes sense?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Very good. So I thank you for all the work that's gone into this, and I'll give it to the next person.
All right, the next person is Mr. Duncan and then Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't want to spill over into the resolution about ADUs, but I just did want to clarify. So a vote in favor of this project tonight is a vote that commits us to 10% affordable housing units in the project. Is that the bottom line of the discussion that we're going to have later about the exact wording of the affordable dwelling unit language?
I don't think it commits us to 10%. I think we're going to have that conversation unless Mr. Shields corrects me otherwise. My understanding was that that would be done at a later time in February, where we would decide, in fact, if money is reallocated from other voluntary concessions in the pot of money, for example, that might go to schools or libraries or whatever, could be reallocated towards affordable housing, which may get us to 10%. But that was my understanding of tonight's action, that in fact, we would not formally allocate that money to affordable housing, bring it up to or near 10% in tonight's action. But Mr. Shields, could you clarify?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. And I'll just say briefly that what the developer has committed to is that if the council, if the council grants approval with the voluntary concessions, there's a structure that does commit the developer to providing up to 10% of the units as affordable within the structure that they've laid out in the VCs.
How to express this? All right, I guess based on conversations that I've had with other members one-on-one, again, my understanding is that, a key component of the proposal is the 10% ADUs. The process through which we get there is, and this is the question for staff, one that we will engage in during the month of February, and we will vote on at the meeting of February 8th or at the latest February 22nd. Is that understanding correct?
At the request of council, staff has prepared a draft resolution that you can see tonight that would get you to the 10% of the units as affordable. It is I think the consensus of council that action on that resolution would be scheduled in February. But the draft has been prepared so that people can see it and so that that could be discussed. But as I think Vice Mayor Connolly noted, I think the idea is to have that discussion possibly a little bit later tonight.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for some real progress on a couple of the issues. So in view of the lateness of the hour, it seems to me that the Whole Foods issue has been resolved in a positive way. The State Theater continues to be a concern of mine, but it sounds like there's been some effort there to reach an accommodation, and the commitment of the developer to keep that offer on the table through site plan approval is fundamental. And I'll be asking the city attorney how we just assure that that will be the case going forward. Now, with respect to another part of the project that didn't get a lot of discussion tonight was how many apartment units are a part of this now?
So we're at 339 units. So we started at 350, and that was reduced after the first submission down to 339. And so it's remained at 339 since that time.
Okay, 339. And I know, Mr. Adams, you were quoted in the news press as saying you weren't going to maximize profits, and that's appreciated. You willing to say publicly what the profits are on this project, because that might be relevant to our consideration?
Sure, and I think the quote was actually just taken from the city council work session last week. So, I can't speak to sort of where they got that, from that point. But, in terms of the profits, I mean, we're not going to, in a public meeting, open our books. That's not something that I think is appropriate for, I guess, discussion or for us to do, at a public meeting.
Okay, so you're not going to open your books and you're asking the city to approve a project with what looks to be some benefits, certainly benefits that are in some ways positive, but you're not willing to open your books. So I think that's a fundamental problem. I want to go back to the basis for this ordinance was that a significant benefit is provided to the developer to put residential where only commercial was permitted before. They have the burden of going forward. And one of the concerns I have is that that burden seems to shift as we go along to the city to justify why the developer shouldn't provide the development. And yet in all this, what's absent is what is the real upside for the developer, and where are there points where we could demand more and better even than we are here pursuing the city's interest. But I think your refusal to provide that information on the record is important. So I'll be proposing an amendment later on, Mr. Mayor. So when we get to that, I'd be pleased to provide that. But I know there may be other comments and questions from members of City Council. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Speaking of which, are there other questions or comments from council? So maybe not at the present. Let me ask the city clerk, is there any public comment?
Yes, we did receive an additional comment. Would you like me to read that?
Please.
This is from Thomas Carter, the owner of the State Theater. Good evening, City Council members. I'm writing to make sure that the members of council and others concerned are aware that the State Theater and the developers of the Broad and Washington Street have not yet reached a mutually agreeable solution to the impact that this development will have on the State Theater. While the developer acknowledges that there will be impact, the State Theater feels that they have consistently underestimated and undervalued the extent of this disruption. We have asked for what we consider a very reasonable recompense for the impact on our overall business, both daytime and evening events. At present, the difference in our evaluations amount to less than 2% of the state's normal income, but this represents a real loss to us that we can ill afford to absorb. We request that the council postpone approval of this development until the state and the developer reach a fair and just agreement. I would like to say that I believe in the long run this project will be a benefit to the city, but first and foremost, we ask that council assure that the existing businesses are not irreparably damaged in the process. Thank you for your time and attention to this matter.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so we have that comment. Why don't we turn our discussion to the ADU issue that was raised earlier? Do people want to make some comments about that, or thoughts or suggestions?
Is that the version that's up right now?
I'm not sure what's up right now. I can't read it.
I have up the draft resolution that Mr. Shields provided.
Do you have any comments, Ms. Hardy?
Yes, I'm happy to start. So first, thank you to staff for putting this together. I think this has been kind of a long discussed opportunity to do more than just talk about affordable housing. It's been on our work plan for years. I think being inclusive and welcoming is a core part of our values and our vision for the city. So I'm glad that we have the opportunity to do this now. And because we have been so successful investing so much in our CIP, I do think this is a real good opportunity, really tangible, impactful policy to actually relook at how we use VCs differently than we have before. So I think what's proposed in the resolution is essentially making some trade-offs. And I know that trade-offs are really never easy, but I think that is essentially our job, which is to have that broad view of needs across the city and figure out how to allocate those limited resources. And given that we have done far less for affordable housing, I do think it is appropriate for us to look at that differently. So I think what it lays out right now is an option where we can get to kind of that 10% number, something we've never achieved before in any of our developments. And I think this will not only add that permanently affordable stock of 33 or 34 units, it also serves deeper AMIs, which we've never been able to do before. And also, I think we've called out prioritization to school, city, and employees who currently work in the city. And not to mention kind of setting a high bar for future developments going forward. So I would be supportive of this resolution. I know that we want to be able to act on this fairly quickly, but at the same time, I know that we would like the school board to have an opportunity to discuss with this. So I do look forward to that, their input. I know that equity is a shared value across the general government and the schools. So I look forward to having the schools, parks, and library be a partner with us on this.
Thank you. Other comments? Let's see who made the comment or has got their hand up. Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So my question is really if I wanted to make an amendment on the voluntary concessions, I noticed that it appears in the documents relating to the first action, and then there's a separate resolution. Do I need to move to amend both or one? Because I think the structure tonight is once we approve the first action, that establishes the notion that the additional ADUs would be paid for out of city, that money would otherwise go to the city for the other voluntary concessions, that action will have been taken, and that this resolution simply defines more particularly what type of residential units and what AMIs. And by the way, this process is not the most transparent process I've seen in the city, and I don't know how the public can begin to follow this. But in any event, so I would ask the city attorney, what do I need to move to amend?
I think, and I'll ask the manager to weigh in if I don't get this right, but my understanding is that the resolution is before you tonight for discussion purposes only. Under the voluntary concessions as they exist today, you will have an option to determine how you structure the affordable housing. The developer has offered essentially options that you can decide down the road through use of a resolution like the one that's before you for discussion. So I think that you would need to look at the motion for the approval of the special exceptions and build in a change at that point, when in framing that, and you could make your approval of one of the special exceptions subject to a change that you wanted to have made. But I think what's happened, and I would like if the manager can weigh in to be sure that I've got this right. I believe that the VCs provide the option for council to ultimately decide using a resolution like the one that's before you for discussion, how you want to allocate the affordable housing and other community benefits.
So, Madam City Attorney, what my understanding is it's simply amending the resolution would not change the overall structure, which is the city gets 6% of the units affordable, part of VCs, that we are committing to any additional VCs would be paid, any additional affordable dwelling units would be paid for by reducing the money, say, that goes to the schools, and I know a lot of talk about, well, it doesn't affect traffic calming and Lawton Street, but I'm not sure that's very clear. But even if it were, we would be removing money from the schools, libraries, parks, and recreation and moving them into ADUs. So it's not the developer in any way, and this is a fundamental point. The developer is not paying for those additional units. We are paying for those additional units through subtractions from other previously negotiated. So my amendment would, unless I'm wrong, Madam City Attorney, my amendment would be to amend page 13, small I, 3 I's, small I, delete everything in small I after if offset, delete 3 small i's under the larger 3 small i's, and delete paragraph IV4, and therefore it would put the cost of the additional ADUs on the developer and not the city. I'm sure the developer doesn't like it, and we'll hear all kinds of complaints about it, but that's a motion that I want to make to support the additional units, as I've been talking about since the fall. In fact, I may have been the first one to suggest we move to 10% on these developments, but never in my thinking was that, oh, the city would sacrifice payments to the schools and others, but rather that it would be an additional voluntary concession. So I would move that amendment. Stated very simply, the amendment would shift the cost of the additional ADUs above 6%, firmly supports the additional ADUs, but shifts the cost to the developer rather than it being a subtraction from other voluntary concessions to the schools and parks, rec, and library. I make the motion.
And I would suggest, Mr. Snyder, because these are the developers' voluntary concessions, you can make a motion that you approve it subject to them making this change. But if they don't voluntarily make this change, I don't think council has the ability to unilaterally change these conditions. Because this is what the developer has offered.
First I ever heard of that approach. We can make it a condition of approval, and that's what we would be doing.
I think that's effectively the same thing. Yes, you can make it that your approval is subject to that change.
Right.
But just to clarify, so the city attorney just advised us that we can't unilaterally make this change to the consent to the VCs. How would this work then? You're saying that it's essentially the same thing, but we can do that? Could you explain?
Well, you could say that you're not approving the project unless this change is made.
And then what happens?
Well, and then it's up to, then the developer would have to either agree to this, or you would probably, the best way to do it would be to take it up later if the developer decided that they would voluntarily agree to this change. But I would recommend that you either have if the developer wants to agree to that change, or you would have to, or I would recommend that you actually wait and determine later if developer wants to submit voluntary concessions that would be agreed upon.
So, Mr. Mayor, Dave Snyder and City Attorney, while I don't agree with this interpretation, the developers are on the phone. Would you agree to that change?
Sure. So I think the answer is no. We can't agree to that change.
Okay, thanks. That's all I need to know at this point. Thanks very much.
Sure.
I want to make. I'm really illustrating, however, that my strong preference from the beginning was not to have the city pay for the additional ADUs, but to rather have the developer do so. The city attorney has advised the developer has to agree. The developer on the record has not agreed. So let's be honest here, that these additional ADUs are being taken out from the schools and the Parks and Rec. It was never my preferred approach, even though I strongly agreed with and want to push for 10% affordable housing in this and every other development. So thanks very much.
Vice Mayor Connolly.
Thanks, Mayor Charter. This change to the way voluntary concessions are allotted has raised a lot of concerns and questions in the community. And we got a letter from the school board as well saying that they did share our goals of equity and creating affordable opportunities, but we're really concerned about the process, about how this has come about in the last few months. So I want to lay out the way I understand it in the hopes that that makes sense to other people. And my understanding of voluntary concessions over the years is for the past 20 years, we've used each different development set of voluntary concessions as part of an overall plan of finance for the whole city to allow us to increase our capacity to what is needed. So each mixed use building provided funding for CIP projects. So at this point, we've gotten funding for the library through mixed use voluntary concessions, and we've taken care of that need. And we've gotten funding for parks, and we've taken care of a lot of their needs, and we've gotten funding for school capacity building, and we've taken care of those needs for the foreseeable future. So as a city council, we have this opportunity to look at what's the next priority in the city, and that is affordable housing. And it's been overlooked because we've been focusing on these other priorities. So it doesn't mean we're taking away CIP funding from the school needs in the future or from the library or from the parks if there are CIP needs. But what we're doing is using this and providing the city with some flexibility so that if we do need to fund school capacity, we can. But based upon what the school's current CIP is, it seems like they don't have any school capacity needs for the near foreseeable future, and the library doesn't have any CIP requests either for the foreseeable future. So I think while it could be perceived as taking money away from the schools and the parks, we can also look at it as a way to share the wealth and say we do have this overall plan of finance, and we're not going to abandon the schools, we're not going to abandon the parks or the library, and we will, as our past performance has shown, we will continue to fund those things as needed. But when we're looking at the whole city, we really need to take a look at it's our responsibility as the city council to look at the needs of the whole city. So that's kind of how I'm looking at this. It's unfortunate that we haven't had a chance to have this conversation with the school board yet. And I'd like to express my apologies to our colleagues on the school board because we have worked so hard to build a collaborative relationship, and we're trying to do the right thing here in doing something that will provide workforce and affordable housing for school and city employees as well. So I'm grateful that we can talk about this resolution tonight and then allow our school board colleagues a chance to learn about it and weigh in on it tomorrow night, so that at their work session, so that they have an opportunity to share their concerns and make changes or suggest additions to this, so that we ensure that we are covering the needs of the schools, the library, and the parks going into the future as well. So I think this is really kind of a very progressive and radical way to do this. And as Mr. Snyder just asked, it would be great if we could have more money from the developer, but a memo that Mr. Shields sent earlier today said this project is one of the largest, if not the largest, set of voluntary concessions that were received from any developer in all our years of doing mixed use. So I think we've landed at a good point. I'm glad that what we can approve in the project tonight, and I'll confirm this with Mr. Shields, the wording of the voluntary concession and the complete approval means we have the flexibility in the future to make changes to how we allocate the voluntary concessions. Is that correct?
That is correct. What the developer has offered is an option. And so then the draft resolution provides the council with the means to direct staff on how to exercise that option.
Okay. So I do thank my colleagues on council who came up with this idea and have been working on it. And I think I think it's a good way to proceed.
All right, Mr. Duncan.
I just had a process question. Did Mr. Snyder's proposal get withdrawn, or was it seconded, or what are we talking about right now?
Well, there wasn't anything to amend because there's no motion on the table. So there was no amendment, at least as I understood it, to be amended. So I don't know if it's really anywhere right now other than the comments you've already heard. Although when we get to making a motion regarding this project, certainly there's an opportunity to have further discussion. But at this point, I think we're just generally either asking questions or making comments.
Gotcha.
So you're welcome to do either.
No, thanks. I just wondered where we were in the process.
Okay. Vice Mayor, I see your hands up. Is that from the last question or do you have an additional one?
No, I don't have one. Sorry. I think I meant to turn off my microphone.
Okay, Mr. Snyder, did you have an additional comment or question?
Yeah, yes. So the way I'm looking at this is maybe a little bit different from the Vice Mayor, because there's no doubt that the schools will need capital expenditures in the future, that so will the libraries, parks, and recreation. And by taking money that would otherwise have gone to them in the voluntary concessions, we mean that those needs will have to be filled by the taxpayers in the future. So I think we have to be clear what the proposal here is. And it is removing capital contributions, and capital needs will be there in the future, and the taxpayers will have to fill that with other money. Again, I like the idea of moving to 10%. I think I was one of the first to advocate it, but never in the sense that has emerged with this current proposal. And at the appropriate time, I'll make several other motions. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So are there any other questions or comments? We do need to start working towards final disposition of this case. We do have another matter tonight, and we are going to take a break here shortly. So I would just ask you to keep that in mind as relates to final comments and also getting a motion here shortly. Mr. Duncan?
I just wanted to, on this particular question, associate myself with the Vice Mayor's remarks. I thought they were well taken.
Okay. Why don't we move to just get a motion on the table then right now? Unless there's any other questions, we can have comments after we have a motion on the table. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Council, let me just suggest before you make a motion, it may be useful to separate currently the proposed motion on the staff report has the two resolutions together. It may be useful to do one at a time, just because there may be people who wish to vote differently on different ones. So I would suggest that for those motions, you do one resolution and then the other.
Well, so we can put them both on the table, right? And just go ahead and have comments as each one goes, and then obviously have separate votes as well.
Yes, I was speaking of voting, yes.
Okay. All right. Would anyone like to make a motion now?
Mayor, I move to adopt TR 20-33 and TR 20-34.
All right. And do we have a second?
Second.
On each motion?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a motion or two motions that have both been moved and seconded. Let's go and see if there's procedurally anything that people want to do before we start getting into comments and our vote. Mr. Snyder, do you have your hand up as well?
I do. Mr. Mayor, so I'd move to amend the two resolutions to require that the additional ADUs be paid for by the developer and not out of the other voluntary, the other VCs.
Okay, and just to clarify with the city attorney, because we've heard from her earlier and it's just a little unclear to me. City attorney, do you have thoughts on what you just heard?
I think that if, and it's maybe just in the phrasing, but if the suggestion is that the resolutions be subject to the developer agreeing to change the voluntary concessions, or conditioned upon a change to the voluntary concessions, then I think that that's how it can work for you to go forward.
But is that a conditional approval? In other words, that if we say we approve it subject to them changing their voluntary concessions, is that even permissive?
Well, I think, yes, I think you can do that if you're not ready to approve the resolutions. The best way to do it would be to delay approval and wait, and come back to see if you have agreement on voluntary concessions. But I think you could do it conditioned upon those, but that means you have not given approval to this project unless those voluntary concessions are changed, which the developer has already said they're not going to do.
Okay. With respect to the formality of the amendment you just heard, if that were to be made, it would need to be seconded, correct?
Correct. And you have to have a vote on whether to adopt the amendment. And then you would move forward on either the amended motion or the original one.
Okay. So we do have a motion or seeking an amendment to both. I'm going to ask, is there a second on those would be amendments to two motions. Is there a second for either or both amendments? In other words, the amendments to each motion. Is there any more?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. We don't need to drag it out. I didn't hear any second, so can I move on?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. The next motion I'd make is a motion to table TR 20-33 and TR 20-34 in response to the request of the school board and the State Theater.
So just for my edification, what are you seeking to table?
TR 20-33 and TR 20-34.
Okay, so you don't want to have this case decided at all. The idea originally was to have the matter of the allocation of additional VC capital contributions to be made at a later point. You're saying to just hold the whole case up, basically, not
at the request of the school board and the State Theater.
Okay, so we have a motion to do that as well. Do we have a second for that amendment? Okay, looks like it fails.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion on the table and a second. We've had some amendments that have failed. Let's go on to comments. Do people want to make some comments before we move to the final vote here? Additional comments? Looks like we've got a hand up. Let me just find who that is. Ms. Hiscott? Ms. Hiscott, did you have a comment?
Yes, sorry, I took my hand down and didn't turn my microphone on. I would like Ms. McCroskey to comment on the verbal offer and the offer from the applicant to extend until site plan its offer to the State Theater. I'm assuming that since there's nothing written in there, that that's a verbal agreement and not a legal agreement.
I think you're correct that it would not be, there's nothing that would enable the city to act to enforce that agreement if it didn't happen. I mean, if the developer did not follow through.
Well, let's just ask, let me ask the developer then. You've stated here publicly that the offer that you made earlier today, and I won't go through it all, I think it's on the record already, would remain open through site plan. Can you affirm that publicly again, that that offer will stay on the table through site plan?
Yes, we absolutely affirm that offer will stay on the table through site plan.
Okay. Ms. Hiscott?
Thank you. That's it.
Okay. Other comments or questions?
I'll just make brief comments if that's okay, Mayor.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. So I do think this project really has come a long way. I was thinking back to the original approvals in the first version of the project and even at the beginning, and since the fall, where we've made progress on kind of parking replacement, in-room parking, the ground floor plaza, which I was never a fan of before when it was kind of elevated. I think we've improved, we've strengthened the Whole Foods language, and of course, we spent a lot of time on affordable housing. So I do think that I appreciate the developer making lots of investments and looking out for multiple interests and really trying to do their best. I don't think we ever will approve kind of the perfect project, but I do appreciate that this is as good as I think we've seen it so far, especially when we compare the voluntary concessions and the community benefits, not to mention kind of that final home for Creative Cauldron. So I will be prepared to vote yes tonight.
All right, thank you. Other comments anyone would like to make? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to be brief. 6 years in the making ought to be enough evidence that the City of Falls Church drives a hard bargain when we do major developments. So any quick buck developer that thinks they're going to swoop into town and make some fast cash will learn otherwise. I want to thank everybody who has helped improve this project through the years. I thank especially the neighbors who are obviously most affected by this development. Understand that this is going to be, a certain measure of inconvenience to them for the period of construction. We know about that on the West End. Appreciate their patience. Hopeful that although we are a great city now, we will only remain great if we adapt to changing times. And the building that we're, I hope, going to support tonight includes elements that really will, I think, make Falls Church, and particularly Falls Church's downtown, competitive well into the end of this century. The number of people who are going to be living in this building and hopefully the Atlantic building across the street, which will come to us a little later, I think will provide a built-in customer base for Clarendon Don's and Thompson's and Mr. Brown's store and all the other downtown establishments who need customers, like all small businesses do. The Home for Creative Cauldron is a strong plus and gives us an arts anchor along with the State Theater. And I appreciate and understand them driving a hard bargain. Appreciate the developer negotiating in good faith with them. And I hope that they will reach a conclusion that will help the State Theater weather what are already tough times, and we understand that, but emerge from this as an even stronger institution than it is today. The work from home units are appealing to me, especially. I had asked for that to be included, and I appreciate the developers' willingness to consider that. Obviously, the grocery, a big plus. The more efficient use of the city's surface parking lot, basically creating an air ride structure above it, is good planning, good land use, and in the end will provide better parking arrangements than we have there now for all the local businesses. So in conclusion, the affordable housing issue, which I want to give particular credit to Ms. Hardy for working for months, years, going around to boards and commissions and bringing it up as a equity concern. It's very fitting that the Unity and Justice Plaza that is discussed as part of this project will be given real form in our commitment to a larger percentage of affordable dwelling units than we've been able to swing in any previous project. So I want to thank all who are involved and look forward to our discussion in February of nailing down the details of that. So with that, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
All right. Anyone else like to make any comments before we move to a vote? Vice Mayor Connolly.
in the interest of time, I'll just associate myself with Mr. Duncan's remarks and thank him for saying all of that.
All right. Anyone else would like to make any comments before we move to a vote? Mr. Snyder, is your hand up, or is that from previous?
It is. Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. So there's a lot about this that's good, particularly the location for Creative Cauldron. I've long been a supporter of that. I like the fact that we're moving to 10% ADUs. I've advocated that. It's not the way that I wanted to get there. It's not, in my view, the best way to get there. Everything that I've tried to do with this project, both tonight and previously, was to improve both the outcome and the process for getting there. And I plan to vote for this project. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments before we go ahead and move to a vote? I've got a few I'd like to just say. One, I will support this project. I think through this project, we're continuing to raise the bar here in Falls Church. Whole Foods, I think, is a really exciting development and something that's very fitting with our community and will just be a great addition to Falls Church. I think for a change that's been a long time in coming, but starting to come around as people in Falls Church don't have to go elsewhere to get their needs met. So, today, if you want to go to Whole Foods, you go to Arlington, you go to Fairfax County. In the next couple of years, people will be coming from those places to spend money in Falls Church. This will reinvigorate our downtown and will allow people and give people an opportunity and a reason to come spend time here, spend money here. And this will lead to stronger businesses in the area. And in some ways, it's back to the future with people coming back to cities, to towns, to main streets, as opposed to going to malls and the like. And to me, this is an organic and natural place for people to shop and mingle in our downtown, our commercial downtown, our main street. The tax revenues are going to be very good, very exciting for our city. The grocery stores have been one of the few financial bright spots in this horrible COVID pandemic, but they've brought a lot of revenue to the city, and I believe this will as well. So that's very exciting. Bike share as part of the community benefits for this project, I think, is also great to just get a critical mass of bikers here in the city and get people used to and have convenient availability for bikes, and bike share is great. Creative Cauldron obviously is another exciting thing and reinforces our commitment to the arts, particularly in our downtown areas. Once again, we're raising the bar on environmental issues. Just over these past years, our school has gone from, I think the Mount Daniel edition may not have even been certified at all. I can't remember, but now we're at LEED Gold, and we've got a high school that is net zero ready. I'm just sorry Dan isn't here in person to listen to that. We were talking about the conduit, and I was thinking about Dan because that was his issue, but I hope he's looking down, pleased with the way we continue to improve sustainability here in the city. Affordable housing, again, I think that's also an exciting development. I mean, just for starters, getting it affordable for the life of the project. But then the possibility of getting up to 10% is also a really exciting development. Shared parking, I think the parking will also be improved in the downtown with more efficient use and shared use of parking resources. So I think that's exciting also. So anyway, I think there's an awful lot to like about this project. I'm prepared to support it. And I would just ask that the developer continue to work with the State Theater and its neighbors, because as construction comes along and the details are worked out in site plan, the landscape screening, lighting and the like, there's going to be a lot more work to be done. And so I would just ask you to continue on the path you've set so far. It looks like we've got one last comment. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Hiscott.
Thank you, Mayor. I think you've articulated all of our collective points really well there, and I just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity to be involved in this process, and I'm glad to be voting for this project tonight. That's it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Are there any other comments that people would like to make before we go ahead and move to a vote? All right, Madam Clerk, have at it.
Ms. Conley?
Can we vote separately on the two items?
Yes, we are. Let's go ahead and call out the number that you're doing the vote for, just for formality's sake, if you don't mind, Madam Clerk.
For TR 20-33, Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse,
Ms. Heath, I've recused myself from these matters.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
and Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0 with Mr. Lickenhouse recusing himself. And the vote for adopting TR 20-34, Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse.
Same here, Ms. Heath. Recuse myself.
Thank you. Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0 with Mr. Lickenhouse recusing himself. Thank you, council.
All right. Congratulations to our developer. And we look forward to seeing a whole few of foods in the near future and some affordable housing dwellings and a lot of other good stuff. So congratulations to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just before we sign off, just wanted to thank the city council and staff, and in particular, Ms. Ruzzi, who has really just been fantastic at keeping things moving throughout this process. So thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. And so, Mr. Shields, this will be something we'll bring back as to the proposed resolution in February after the school board's had a chance to mull it over and we can get some additional community input. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mayor. And I've been asked to attend the school board meeting tomorrow night, and I plan to do so, and just explain the proposal and explain the proposed allocation. And I'll certainly take notes and try to relay their comments as best I can to the city council, as I'm sure they'll be doing directly as well.
Mr. Shields, I can make a suggestion, because I thought that community benefits matrix that goes back to kind of 20 years of mixed use development was really helpful. So I think that might just be good history to share, kind of how we've gotten voluntary concessions in the past and where they've gone as good context for this discussion.
All right,
I would
Mr.
agree.
Snyder, did you have additional comment?
That was it.
No, Mr. Snyder, he had his hand up.
Sure. Just very quickly, a request of the city clerk that when the minutes of this meeting are put together, that my two proposed actions be included in the minutes.
Yes, sir. That's something I do, yes.
And Mr. Shields, when you attend the meeting tomorrow, please formally invite the school board and the representatives to attend our meeting and discussion if they'd like to participate.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a break. We've been at this.
Mayor Tarter, I will just note the next item is related to this project and then relating to the sale of the property.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Let's bang that out and then we'll move on to a break. So let's go ahead and do we need to hear anything more about this, Wyatt?
So for the ordinance for sale, I will just note that the terms are what the council has reviewed now for probably 3 months. The city attorney has worked very diligently on the actual term, the agreement of sale. I think she is pleased with that document in terms of how it protects the city's interest. And I want to thank the Insight Development team and Mr. Adams for their work with us on that agreement of purchase and sale. So I won't go through the details of the transaction because they've been reviewed on multiple occasions prior to tonight, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, let me ask the city clerk whether there's any public comment for this portion of this item.
There is not.
Okay, so let's go ahead and see if there are any questions or comments from council. And if not, a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TO 20-25.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Is there any comments anyone would like to make or questions before we go to a vote? All right, Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse.
To recuse myself, hopefully for the last time, Celeste, ever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
and Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0 with Mr. Litkenhouse recusing himself. Thank you, council.
All right, a final congratulations to the developer, and thank you again for your hard work and all the time you spent working with the community and staff, and to staff again. Keita, thank you so much, and all who've worked on this. I know it's a long time coming, but I think it's a very exciting development for our community, so thank you all. With that, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 10:25. So we'll reconvene in 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, sounds good. Let's move on to the next item. Madam Clerk, will you call the next item of business?
Yes, we have TR 20-52, resolution to approve a site distance easement for Bayer Volvo of approximately 371 square feet at the property yard storage lot RPC 52-101-012 and authorize the city manager to execute the deed.
All right, Mr. Shields.
Our Public Works Director, Mr. Zach Bradley, will give a very brief staff report on this.
All right.
Good evening. So this is the same easement that we had presented a couple weeks ago at work session. There are no substantial changes. This overlays an existing Dominion overhead utilities easement. I do want to make 2 points that just to clarify from the work session. I had previously stated that the easement restricted anything above 3.5 feet in height. It's actually 2 feet in height due to the topography of the roadway. And there is language in there that would allow Fairfax County to perform maintenance at the city's expense if we are not able to maintain that 2-foot height restriction. We don't expect either one to be a problem. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
All right, thank you. Let me ask the city clerk, is there any public comment on this item?
There is not.
All right, questions or comments from council?
I just
If
have a
not,
quick question, Mr. Mayor.
yes.
Zach, is there anything that needs to be conveyed to buyer that hasn't been already? Anything that's going to impact their physical property that they're not aware of?
No, we've been working through this with them, and this is the kind of an all-encompassing last piece of the puzzle for them to get final closeout through the county.
Got it. Figured as much. Thanks, man.
Mm-hmm.
All right, unless there are any other questions, let's have a motion, please.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
hi, I'd like to move approval of TR 20-52. This is Snyder.
Okay, and do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Lichtenhouse on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
and Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Snyder, looks like your hand is up. Is that on something different or on the prior matter?
No, that was the prior matter. I'll lower it now. Thank you.
It's okay, I took care of it. All right, let's move on to the next item, Madam Clerk.
Yes, we have TR 21-02, resolution to amend resolution 2018-37 to change the approved voluntary concessions, community benefits, terms and conditions dated August 10, 2018 to provide for escrow security for the theater use instead of withholding residential certificates of occupancy for the project known as Founders Row on application by Mill Creek Residential Trust, Founders Row Holding LLC.
All right, thank you. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. This item is before the council just for a referral out to boards and commissions. And in the staff report, where we would recommend scheduling a public hearing and final consideration on February 22nd, 2021. Mill Creek Residential has come to the city with a request for this amendment to their entitlements for the Founders Row project. With this amendment, it is driven by the bankruptcy of the theater tenant for the lease, which had already been executed and signed. But with the COVID pandemic, their selected theater is now in Chapter 11 with all of their leases that they currently have now being handled through the courts. The developer has stated to the city and states, I think, formally their commitment to pursue a theater for this space. And so this amendment to the COs does not relieve the developer of that requirement. It does, however, if it's approved by the city council, it would change effectively the guarantee of the theater and shift it from being guaranteed by the certificates of occupancy of up to 50% of the residential units, and would replace that with a payment of $120 per square foot of the movie theater that would be held in escrow and under the control of the city. It would not be in the city's coffers, but it would be in an escrow account. And those funds could then only be used for tenant improvements for the ultimate theater user for the site. So that is the request that is before the city council. We are joined on this call by the representative of Mill Creek, Mr. Muffler, and let him speak to the request, and then we would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that introduction and summary, Mr. Shields. Thank you to city staff for their help throughout this process, and thank you to city council for hearing us tonight and for a very productive work session last week. So to bring the public up to speed for those who were not available before, Mill Creek is not seeking a change in their commitment to the city. I'd like to make that point very clear up front. I know there was a comment at the beginning of the hearing regarding our desire to increase residential or reduce commercial. We are not making any kind of change to our commitments to the city, to the neighbors of what was approved in our site plan. We are asking for a relaxation of a restriction, rather a substitution of a restriction in the quote unquote accountability clause, as Mr. Shields said, to the guarantee for bringing a theater to the city of Falls Church. We sincerely appreciated City Council's understanding last week that this was not so much a self-inflicted wound as much as it was an outcome of the global pandemic. And again, I will not elaborate on the state of the movie theater industry. I think that anyone who has read the newspaper over the last year understands the dire straits that industry is in and continues to be in. That being said, through the help of consultants and working the marketplace, we have had some moderate success in finding operators who would be interested potentially in taking the Studio Movie Grill space at an adjusted lease. We are currently vetting through those options. It is very early in the process. It'd be very premature of myself to commit to anything or to any specific operator at this point in time. However, I would like to reiterate that we are not trying to change our program. We are committed to doing what we can to fill the conditions of this agreement and to bring a movie theater to the city of Falls Church. I'd like to touch on a couple of points and modifications to the language that you see tonight that may be a little bit different than there was last week. Chief among them was Mayor Tarter's concern that there is a true alignment of interests between all parties here. The Mill Creek is still motivated and proactive in searching for a replacement theater, while also not being overly punitive. Again, part of the understanding that this isn't something that we necessarily brought upon ourselves. We all want to see a theater. We want to make sure that we're working together in lockstep to accomplish that. So while we have not changed the economics of the commitment, one additional item that we have added to this text is that we will be providing city staff with a confidential, meaning not public, monthly report that summarizes our actions, kind of the who, what, where, when, and why of how we're going through this process, who we're talking to, what the next steps are, to affirm that we are committed to this process. I do believe that over the next 3 or 4 months, we will have significantly more data at our disposal than what we do today. We all remain very optimistic, as we heard from Fairfax County earlier, that as the year progresses, as the vaccine reaches more and more people, that the movie theater industry will improve along with many, many other industries as well. But where we stand today, things are still tremendously difficult, not only for operations, but for release of theaters, of movies from the studios. And I'm happy to answer any questions and fill you in on any market, market data, market impact that we are aware of. One last point that I would like to mention was a concern was brought up last week, or rather a question, just an inquiry, as to how much does it cost? What are the economics of building out a movie theater? Short answer is there's no one easy answer. The long answer is, depending on the space, again, we've put in approximately $5 million into the shell of the space where it stands today. From there on, we are anticipating that it takes about $200 per square foot to build out the remaining of the theater. It's incredibly important to us as the landlords, very similar it is to the city in Mill Creek, that the tenant here have some kind of security, have some kind of skin in the game, which provides us security in the deal. If otherwise, if Mill Creek is putting in the full amount of money for this deal, it really doesn't leave that movie theater any kind of obligation to follow through on their terms. And we could be dealing with this situation again 6 months from now. So as the commitment would read today, that's approximately 60% of the build out for the theater, with the tenant putting in the additional 40%. The actual economics of the deal could be structured very differently. It just that is all, as you would understand, part of the negotiation of the project. But elaborating on that, as to that $3.6 million, what does that mean to Mill Creek? What would be the incentive for us to just say, you know what, city, keep your cash, and we're going to try to figure out a new deal here? The reality is, in our opinion, for multiple reasons, a movie theater is the best user here. For the space as it's constructed, which is essentially a dark warehouse, a movie theater is the logical user. On top of that, a movie theater is the rising tide that lifts the rest of that remaining retail to fulfill the program that Mill Creek Residential has promised to our investors. And to emphasize something that I have said at every meeting, I think that since the beginning of the site plan process, Mill Creek is the 100% owner of the retail. It does us no good. It serves us no benefit to leave this retail fallow or to put into substandard operators and retailers into that project. It would, I mean, candidly, it would tank the program. So a theater, we believe, not only pays us the best base dollar rent based on conversations we've had, but it's also the best user for that space and for the remaining retail. We could get into the economics, but essentially, I mean, you're looking at, if you wanted to just park your cash plus the cash that would be required to build out a separate user, you would need somewhere between $17 and $20 a square foot more to make up that lost that lost cash that you're putting down, which is simply not achievable. So there really is no other substitution. Not to mention, again, circling back to where we started at the beginning of this, we are not seeking to revise our commitment of a movie theater. We are just simply seeking an adjustment to the accountability. So that's the long and short summary. Hopefully it helped address some of the questions and concerns that came up last week. Again, I want to thank the city staff for their brainstorming, for their help throughout this process. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you very much. Before we get on to questions, let me just ask the city clerk whether there's been any public comment.
Nothing further from what I read in the written comments.
All right, let's go on then to questions or comments from council. Do any council members have any comments or questions? Okay, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you, Mayor. So question, I guess, for both city attorney and city manager. So given that this is a resolution, I think the recommendation right now is to refer this out. So if there were different mechanisms after we refer this out, how would that work?
So as you did observe, if there are recommendations, those can be incorporated into the council's final consideration without causing a restarting of the process or a new first reading. And so happy to answer any of the questions on that, but I do want to be very clear on that.
Thank you.
All right, other comments, questions? Mr. Duncan.
So just to be clear, so what we're going to vote on tonight is to refer this to Planning Commission and the EDA. We'll hear back from them pretty short order because we're going to turn it around and try to vote on it for final consideration February 22nd.
That is correct.
Okay, we'll look forward to hearing from Planning Commission and the EDA, and look forward to Mr. Muffler having a chance to share with them some of the things that he's shared with us.
Okay, other comments or questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Hi, Dave Snyder. So really what we're doing here is we're removing a maximum incentive and agreeing to a lesser incentive for the linchpin of this whole project, which was the movie theater. I note a very well written and constructed letter from the homeowners association nearby where they raised serious objections to this and recounting what their view of this project was, which squares very much with mine. To me, this proposal is just bad negotiating. It's giving up something and getting nothing in reality in return. I mean, if we were really serious, why don't we require 10% affordable dwelling units, other types of value, or stick with the existing structure, which does provide the maximum incentive, which is, after all, why the developer wants it waived in favor of an alternative. So I'm prepared very easily to vote against this. This is not just a process vote. This is a vote to surrender a major point of leverage to prevent the kind of bait and switch that we've seen in other projects. And while I appreciate the developer's comments, I can't go along with this. This is like an unconditional surrender. So thank you.
All right, other comments? Mr. Duncan?
I'm sorry. I did want to ask a question, reference to the homeowner association letter. And there was a line at the bottom of the first page that says that there's a release to build more residential units at Founders Row. Is that the case? Is there anything in here that allows or suggests that the developer is going to build more residential units than we've already approved?
Councilmember Duncan, the answer to that question is no. There's no increase in residential associated with this amendment whatsoever.
Okay, well, I think that's an important clarification. I mean, I know the folks at Steeples, they've been working this hard. Another group of neighbors who have had some constructive suggestions, but I think it is important that we clear that up. I mean, this is it's an opportunity to recognize that the world ain't what we hoped it would be. I don't think there's any doubt that if there had not been a pandemic, we'd be pretty close to smelling popcorn coming out of that space. But there is a pandemic, and as we heard earlier tonight, it's a hot mess, and it's going to be a hot mess for most of this year. So in my view, this is just a willingness to accept reality and to take a step that will enable us to live to fight another day. And we need Mr. Muffler and his team out there fighting, and I at least believe that they will do that because it's in their financial interest to do so. Others can have different opinions, of course, and can vote as they wish, but I'm quite interested in not seeing this corner sit empty for an indefinite period of time. I think that's not a good practice, doesn't help our image as a city that tries to find a way to make things work. And I hope that my colleagues will support this.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Thanks, Phil. Those are good points. Two clarifying points here for Wyatt or Carol or the developer or all three. Is there any obligation for us to repay that escrow money with interest?
The answer to that question is no.
Okay, so that $120 per square.
Actually, let me think about that. So, when you say repay it, that's the word that kind of threw me.
Meaning if they're parking, I forget the number, $3.6 million in escrow, does that money earn interest sitting in an account that would have to be paid back with interest once that money is put to work?
So if I may, Mr. Shields, the way
please
we
go
had
ahead.
structured the language was that this $3.6 million would be deposited into a third-party escrow account with a third-party escrow agent.
Got it.
Like a
Okay.
title attorney. So
Got
it would be our cash earning interest in a separate bank account that the city would be party to. So any interest earned on those dollars would come back to us. But I mean, it's not like the city would have to be owing interest. It's just sitting in a bank account.
Got it. I missed that part, that it was going to be held in a third-party account. So that
Yep.
raises another question. If the property trades before a theater is identified, what is the mechanism there?
This agreement would run party to any kind of transaction. I mean, the easy answer to that is to say there will not be a transaction. There cannot be a transaction with half of your retail vacant, with your retail anchor vacant. Plus, our partners are planning on being in this project for quite a long time. But in the event there were, that $3.6 million runs party with the project. It doesn't run party with the ownership.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. But Joe, I think you know as well as anybody.
Completely.
Crazier stuff has happened.
And I would also just note that the requirement for a theater, which is in the entitlements, that runs with the land as well.
Okay.
And is just part and parcel of the entitlements.
Okay.
And there's no sunset on that return of 3 points. It's tied to a movie theater and it's tied to the terms of the lease of the movie theater.
Got it. Carol, the way that this is written, is that your understanding as well? That this
Well,
carries with any future transaction?
I think
convey.
that's right. It's not specific at this point, but we would have, that would be part and parcel of the escrow agreement.
Okay, great. Yeah, it is unfortunate. I don't look at this as a walk back. I look at this as helping a project succeed. And again, having a half-empty building is not going to help with the prospects of identifying a theater operator. So I hope to be able to take my kids there one day. Yeah, I support this and would like to move it to other boards and commissions for review. Thanks.
Okay, any other comments or questions before we move to a vote? I've just had my, Ms. Hardy.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt you though, Mayor. You can go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So I will support this at first reading. I think I would like to hear from the EDA and Planning Commission. But I guess a request for Joe, since you all have done a really nice job engaging the neighbors, and given that there's seems to be some misunderstanding with the Steeples Association, that they think that you're changing kind of the number of residential units or shrinking the commercial units, I do think it's worthwhile for you to follow up and at least clear that up to maintain good relationships there.
Absolutely. I'll reach out to the Steeples Court HOA.
All right, any other comments? I'll just make a few. I just want to make clear, and I think it probably already is clear, that I certainly want to see and expect to see a theater, and this isn't an interim stop to some other use, a gym or, rock climbing wall or something like that, that is my expectation, and that this project was approved with that in mind, and that the notion always has been that the residential would subsidize a theater, that we knew the theater wasn't a huge profit center standing on its own. But by the same token, the world has changed somewhat, and we have a huge hammer over the developer, but I think in many ways it would be unwise to do that. And so we are working with you. I hope you appreciate that, Mr. Muffler, that we do want to work with you. We don't want to be punitive. We want to work together to ultimately see this theater as soon as we can. And so that is why I am also going to vote in favor of this motion, resolution. But I am interested in hearing what our boards and commissions have and giving further thought to ensure that our interests are fully aligned going forward. But I appreciate all you've said, and I think you and Mill Creek have been true to your word so far. So we look forward to getting a movie theater on in this place sooner as opposed to later. But unless anyone else has anything else to say, why don't we go ahead, Madam Clerk, and do this vote?
I need a motion.
Has there been a motion?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Mayor, I move to refer TR 21-02 to the Planning Commission and the Economic Development Authority for review and recommendation to the City Council, and schedule public hearing and final consideration on February 22nd, 2021.
We have a second?
Second.
Mr. Lichtenhouse on the second. Madam Clerk?
It's Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
No,
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-1. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let's keep on going.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it. Look forward to hearing more from you. Let's move on to consent agenda, which looks like it just has an appointment. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right, do we have a motion regarding the consent agenda?
May I remove the consent agenda?
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
yes,
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
All right, and let's move on to business not on the agenda. Are there any standing regional committee, council liaison reports anyone would like to make?
well, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Hi, Dave Snyder. Two quick things. There's an important piece of legislation that is directed toward equity and modernization in the transportation sector for Virginia. It's House Joint Resolution 542. And in particular, I am asking the city to support that and authorize testimony as appropriate. And I know that Cindy Mester has been following it, but in a Virginia Transit Association legislative call this morning, that proposal in particular stood out, and I wanted to make sure we can support it in the very strongest possible terms. And if possible, I'd love to testify at the hearing in support of it. That's point number one. Point number two, we've been getting a lot of letters about the school and decisions made by the schools about opening. I know those are complicated issues, and under the school board's jurisdiction, I don't want to intrude there, but I do need to recognize that we are getting these notes and hope that the schools can respond appropriately. As was mentioned earlier, a number of school employees got their first shots. I think it's 3 to 4 weeks later where they get the second shot in either Pfizer or Moderna. And hopefully after that, the schools can open. That's my hope, but I realize the expertise on that really lies elsewhere. But I think we do recognize that there's significant interest in the community to open the schools. There may be interest contrary to it, but I did want to recognize that those emails are being read, and I assume and hope and believe that they will. The schools will address it appropriately. Anyway, thanks very much for those two comments.
All right, thank you, and I'd welcome your testimony and your representation on that issue. Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Speaking of schools, in light of these emails that we've received, when is our next joint meeting on budget for fiscal year 2022 with the schools?
Mr. Shields, do you know the answer to that?
We don't have a date scheduled prior to March 8th when the budget is presented to the city council. We do that jointly with the chairman of the school board and the superintendent. But if that is the request of council, we could ask for that prior to March 8th, but that would be the normal schedule. That would be the next time we'd see them on the budget.
Yeah, I'd like to have a joint meeting with them about budget guidance as soon as we can accommodate that. I've got some very serious concerns and questions myself, as well as what has been relayed to us by folks in the community. So I'd like to have that meeting sooner rather than later.
All right. Mr. Duncan?
Just to note, the Economic Development Committee is scheduled to meet this Thursday at 1 o'clock through Teams. I've been talking with staff a little bit about the agenda items, and I think maybe Ms. Hardy and Mr. Litgenhouse might have communicated to staff too. That's fine. So I'll be trying to draft an agenda, and hopefully I'll have it ready by Wednesday morning. We can kick it around at the scheduling meeting and then finalize it and meet on Thursday at 1 o'clock.
All right, thank you. Other comments, requests, etc.? Anything else that anyone wants to say before we adjourn our meeting? Vice Mayor Conley, comment?
Yeah, just a quick comment in response to Mr. Lickenhouse. I wonder if maybe the school board, I'm not sure what the school board's budget approval process is, but perhaps we could attend one of their meetings. I don't know. I really don't know what the schedule looks like coming up.
All right, Ms. Esther.
That's my only comment.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to follow up on Mr. Duncan's note for the Thursday meeting at 1, just to remind council that the local government legislative liaison with VML and VA goes that morning from 9 to 11. I know that City Clerk has at least one registration request for the $30 registration fee. If others have done it directly, if you could just let me know who'd be participating, that'd be great. Or I'll volunteer her to help assist with any other registration because I know she's willing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other last words before we adjourn tonight? All right. I don't think there's much else or anything else to be done other than to adjourn and go out and play in the snow. But otherwise, I guess why don't we go ahead and call it a night, adjourn, and see you all coming up here soon. Everybody stay safe and healthy in the meantime.